Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the second part of WhatIf Deku was the son of Lady Nagant. All credits for this video go to their respective authors. So please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Over the next coming month, the news was filled as the police force of Musufado managed to take Raputa's entire drug empire. Every 2 days there were dozens of arrests and seizures of property. At the end of the month, nearly 100 men and women had been arrested and 5 warehouses within the neighboring cities had been seized, all used to hide Raputa's drug empire. After everything was said and done, a total of 1.5 billion USD had been seized, with drugs ranging from methamphetamine up to trigger. The police officers were quick to shut the fear that Raputa was trying to start up instant villain attacks again. During that month and the following months, Mero kept a closer eye on the boys during their mission. They had gotten such a big get-out-of-jail-free card that Mero didn't want to push their luck. And with how Officer Nico was spearheading the operation, Mero wanted to keep the boys far from it. And to help with this, for the months following, missions slowed down for a bit, yet Izuku and Bakugo didn't allow this cautious approach to slow down their training. With how close they thought they were to failing to capture Raputa, and with UAS entrance exam, the pair of boys continued to push themselves in their training. They passed their bodyguard exams with flying colors, and their attention was able to become solely focused on preparing for UAS entrance exam. Something got a laugh from Mero when he first heard about their plan. He then took the time to explain the recommendation program and how he could get the boys a way in. But the two of them explained that they didn't want such an opportunity simply given to them. They wanted to earn it for themselves, and along with making it a test to see how far they had come in their training. So when applications started, Izuku and Bakugo were one of the first to get their names in, and everything was on track until the winter before the entrance exam. The final bell of school had just rung, and Izuku was gathering his school supplies to slip into his backpack. As Izuku slid his supplies into his backpack, his phone buzzed in a pattern that he and Bakugo had set up for Mero, with the thought it was best to know quickly when he was trying to get a hold of them. After zipping up his backpack, Izuku pulled out his phone, curious about what Mero needed him from. As it was only 2 months until UAS entrance exam, Mero had decided to give the boys time to rest and prepare, with the promise they would only do light spars to keep their skills sharp. So far they had kept to the promise. The jury was still out for how January would go. As he stood up from his desk, Izuku opened the text and read it. Izuku Midoriya, you and Bakugo were given the coming months to rest, yet your assistance is required for a new mission. Izuku walked down the aisle of the desk when Bakugo suddenly looked over his shoulder and down at his phone. He scoffed and asked, "Isn't KFC available?" Izuku elbowed Bakugo into the gut to get him to back up as he said, "Stop breathing down my neck." "And I was about to ask that. Is Hawks not available?" Izuku texted and then sent it. It didn't take long for Mero to respond with, "This mission requires a bit more stealth than he is able to give." Izuku showed Bakugo the text and the ash blonde gave out a chuckle. Turning his phone back to himself, Izuku sent the text, "What's the mission?" One of HPSC's undercover agents came across a member of the Shy Hasekai. The member was trying to sell a new type of drug. He called it a game changer, supposedly the drug that is able to temporarily erase quirks, and testing has proven that claim to be correct. Our undercover agents managed to follow the member to their hideout, yet surveillance has been unable to pick up any activity. We need you to infiltrate the hideout and find out what is going on in there. And if possible, find how the Shihasekai are manufacturing this new drug. Mero laid out. "Yakuza sounds pretty serious. Want me to come along?" Bakugo asked. This wasn't the first infiltration mission they had gotten, but this one didn't sound like a test, and there might be some fighting involved. The only problem was they weren't supposed to take combat missions until after they graduated from the UA. Mero said, "This mission is stealth and you aren't exactly the best in that area. I'll be better on my own," Izuku said as he and Bakugo walked out of Aldara Middle School over to their pair of motorcycles. Despite only being 15 years of age, Mero was able to pull a few strings and get the boys their driving licenses and a pair of CX-25R motorcycles. Bakugo's was black with an orange and red accent, while Izuku's was a solid dark green color. "At least I'm better than KFC. He can't shut up," Bakugo said as Izuku and he slipped on their helmets then started their motorcycle. Izuku didn't say anything as he sent Mero a quick text telling him he was available for the mission. Then in sync, the boys kicked their motorcycles in first gear and then pulled out of the parking lot and headed home together. A few years ago, Izuku and Inko with the help of Mero were able to move into a house next to the Bakugos, allowing the two of them to spend more time together outside of training. At home, headed upstairs to his room. Once inside, Izuku tossed his backpack onto his bed. then proceeded to take off his shirt as he walked over to his closet. Izuku then opened the closet and grabbed a clothes hanger that was in the back. Izuku then pulled out an all-black stealth suit. Izuku pulled the black shirt and slipped into it as he walked over to his bed, tossing the hanger onto the bed. Izuku undid his pants and let them drop to the floor. He then took the black pants off the hanger and slipped into them. Finishing off the stealth suit was a black gauntlet that went over his left wrist and a black belt that had a small 4-inch knife on the left and 5 small containers on the back. To cover the stealth suit, Izuku slipped back into his regular clothes, making sure that the shirt was untucked and covering his belt. With that all done, Izuku headed back downstairs and made himself a quick meal of a sandwich and a drink. Using a notepad and pen, Izuku wrote a note to his mom that he might be late for dinner and would be home as soon as possible. With nothing else needing to be done, Izuku headed back to his motorcycle and asked Mero for the location of the hideout. As Izuku slipped on his helmet, a location from Mero appeared. Izuku selected the location on his phone and a map appeared on the lens of Izuku's motorcycle helmet. Kicking the bike into first gear, Izuku headed out and followed the direction. An hour and a half later, Izuku arrived in Wasukako Prefecture, an area that had clung to Japan's past, evident as many of the buildings had been built in old-style Japanese architecture. The location of the hideout directed Izuku to the lower part of town, and soon he found himself driving past the location of Shai Hasekai's hideout. On the outside, it looks like a traditional Japanese building with white walls and red and green roofing. There was a low wall that had floral growing over it surrounding the house. Izuku judged the height of the wall and saw that it would require him to climb a bit to get to the top. Quickly memorizing the house by looking through the closed gate as he drove past it, Izuku increased his speed to not act suspiciously. Once he reached an intersection, he directed himself away from the hideout and into a back alleyway. Parking his motorcycle behind a large garbage bin, Izuku pulled his civilian clothes off and stored them inside the seat. Izuku then raised his left hand and pointed it at the roof of the building that was across from the hideout. A small hook shot out of the small gauntlet around Izuku's wrist. Once the hook had embedded itself, Izuku flexed his hand and the wire began to pull him up the side of the building. Once on the roof, Izuku dislodged the hook and allowed it to get pulled back into his gauntlet. Walking over to the edge of the building, Izuku transformed his arm and rested the end of the barrel on the awning. As Izuku looked down at the Yakuza hideout, a scope appeared on his rifle and he looked through it. It was as the report stated. There wasn't much activity happening from what Izuku could see through the windows. On the occasion, he saw a person, but he couldn't make out any of their faces as they were all wearing masks, medical masks like a person would wear if they were sick. None of them seemed to be doing anything out of the ordinary. They were just walking around the house. Occasionally one of them would step up to one of the windows, take a quick look around, then disappear back into the house. Izuku noted it seemed to happen on a rotation of 4-5 minutes, quickly realizing this to be a schedule of guard rotation. As Izuku continued to sit on the roof of the building, the sun began to fall and the cold of night was beginning to happen. Izuku wanted this as he would use the cover of dusk to sneak into the Shai Hasekai hideout. Soon the sunlight was beginning to disappear, the city lights slowly turning on, and as soon as Izuku saw one of the guards set away from the building, he took off. As Izuku took a step over the side of the building, he slipped the hook of his gauntlet into his hand. As he began to fall, he slapped into the edge of the building and rode the wire down. After quickly descending the building he was on, Izuku soon reached the ground. He tugged on his wire and dislodged the hook. He took off down the alleyway as the wire and hook shot back into place within the gauntlet. Running across the street, Izuku turned to run parallel to the wall. When he reached one of the corners, Izuku summoned all his strength and jumped as high as he could. Yet it was enough to get Izuku over the wall. He had to grab on the vines that had grown over the wall. With the vine getting strong enough, Izuku was about to quickly climb over the wall and jump down onto the grassy lawn behind the wall. When Izuku hit the ground, he rolled before popping off of the ground. Knowing the next guard rotation would be soon, Izuku took off and slid under one of the windows. He waited until he heard footsteps come up to the window and then walked away. Crouching to stay low, Izuku made his way around the house until he was in the back. On the back side of the house, Izuku found a window that didn't seem to have any security wiring around it. Izuku looked around it and saw that it thought the lock was in position. He would be able to get his knife through the seam and unlock the window. After waiting another 4 minutes, it was clear this window was heavily checked. So Izuku took his knife out and worked it through the seam of the window and then pushed the lock open. This allowed Izuku to freely slide the window up and allow access to the inside, which Izuku took by silently hopping, and then to cover his tracks he slid the window back down. Izuku suddenly heard footsteps coming towards the room and moved quickly and quietly to hide in the corner. A few seconds after getting into the corner, a Yakuza member barely poked their head and then walked away. It was clear that since not much activity was happening above ground, their Shai Hasekai had to have some kind of underground bunker. To find evidence of the new drug, Izuku would need to find the entrance to that bunker and have a look around. Waiting for a few footsteps to pass, Izuku walked out into the hallway and followed the Yakuza guard. From the outside, the house looked small, but there are several rooms in the building. Most were just standard rooms, kitchen bedrooms, one of which had an elderly man hooked up to medical equipment. Izuku had to follow as the Shy Hasekai member checked each and every room until they stopped at a small shelf that had a statue of a raven on it. Izuku watched as the Yakuza member pressed the wooden titles down, then a section of the wall drew in, revealing a hidden staircase. Izuku waited until the guard walked down the stairs and the section of the wall moved back into place. With quiet footsteps, Izuku walked up to the shelf and looked over the titles. After moving the raven statue out of the way, he pressed down the titles in the same pattern as the guard. Once Izuku pressed the last title, the section of the wall slid back again, giving Izuku access to the stairs. After putting the raven statue back, Izuku quickly descended the stairs and soon found himself in a labyrinth of hallways. Izuku pressed forward as he needed to find some evidence of how the new quirk-destroying drug was being created. If he could get that evidence back to Mero, he could pass it along to heroes and police who could get a warrant to raid the hideout. Yet with all the hallways and rooms, it could take Izuku all night long to find useful evidence. It felt like an eternity passed when Izuku rounded a corner, bumped into someone, and fell to the ground. Looking up, Izuku meets eyes with a large man wearing a crow-plague mask. It was ripped in the back along the man's burnt orange hair to fall around his shoulder. He had a white shirt over a light blue tunic that had been tucked into a belt that held up his black pants. Metal pieces had been wrapped around the man's wrist and stretched over his finger as it acted like gloves. "Who are you, you little punk? You don't look like Yakuza," the man said as he looked down at Izuku. "I am not," Izuku said, crawling back a bit. He was ready for the man to yell out for others, but the man didn't. He just cracked his knuckles as murderous intent filled the air. It made Izuku's instincts yell out and tell him to run away, his training being the sole reason he stayed. "That means I can fight you to the death and not have to worry about Overhaul using his quirk on you. Maybe this will convince him to have a rematch with me. Come, you little runt, get back on your feet and let's fight," the man said, raising his fist, showing he was waiting to act. Izuku quickly got back on his feet as he worked to figure out how to get past the large man. Izuku hadn't gotten to the skill level of making his gunshots absolutely quiet, and in narrow hallways like this the sound was bound to echo. Someone would hear it and come looking for him. He needed to find a way to knock the man unconscious without making too much noise. "I'm in a cheerful mood, so I'll let you take the first shot. Now let me see what kind of man you are," the man said, knocking his fists together. "Well, I thank you for that," Izuku said as he slipped a hand behind his back and tipped his fingers into a container. He then raised said hand up to behind his ear and began to twirl his hair. Once his hair hardened into a bullet, Izuku pulled his hand forwards and flipped the bullet as it looked like he was holding it like a knife. This revealed that the hair was now dyed blue. As Izuku trained in Project Velocity, he learned he could do more with his hair than weave it into bullets. If he dyed his hair a different color and then weaved it into a bullet, the bullet then would have special properties depending on the color. Red turned the bullets into incendiary rounds, able to melt through several layers of high-grade titanium. Yellow became an explosive round. Though the explosions were small in nature, something Bakugo laughed at when first shown. Orange acted as flashbangs, while green could ricochet, allowing Izuku to hit the target without a clear line of sight. Blue, however, was when he needed it, as blue hair dye would cause the bullet to act like a tranquilizer, making the target fall asleep mere seconds after being hit. After testing, it had been found that ingestion of a blue bullet also worked, and since Izuku won't be able to get the bullet up to speed by throwing it, his best bet was getting his opponent to swallow it. "What do you've got there? This fight is strength only, no quirks. That is the only way to test a man's willpower. A fight to the death in nothing but their own hands," the man said as he knocked his fist against, the sound of metal filling the hallway. "Sorry, but I didn't agree to that kind of fight," Izuku said, then charged forward, hoping to catch his opponent off guard. Usually, bigger people struggled to move quicker in narrow areas, something Izuku hoped to take advantage of. Yet the man was faster than expected. As Izuku got in close, the man's arm suddenly shot forward and hit Izuku in the gut. Izuku struggled to keep his stomach content as he fell to the floor. It felt like he had been hit by a freight train as he struggled to keep his breath. The world barely came into focus as Izuku saw another fist coming down low. This hit Izuku in the jaw and threw him down. Izuku hit the ground and rolled around, watching to keep the bullet within his grip. Once the world stopped spinning, Izuku looked down the hallway and saw the large Yakuza member walking up to him. Izuku got to his knees and then felt pain flare up in his rib. He had heard it earlier, but now his ribs were fractured. This was not going to be a fight he could win. Mero should have sent someone else to sneak around. There were heroes that had quirks which would make this a cakewalk. Izuku was not even in high school and was going to fail his first combat mission. "Come, you little runt, don't give up now," "Where's the fire spirit I saw in your eyes?" the man said, as he grabbed Izuku's hair and pulled him up into the air. Izuku's legs kicked around wildly as it felt like his hair was being pulled out. "That look you had earlier, it said you weren't going to ever surrender." Izuku had no idea what the man was talking about. What look he had given that would give that impression? "Where's the fiery spirit of a true man?" the man yelled. Izuku could hear Bakugo yelling at him, telling him to fight back, to never surrender until he won. Izuku gripped the bullet into his hand as he yelled and shoved the bullet through the man's mask. Hoping the bullet was in the man's mouth, Izuku struck the man's throat. Izuku heard the man swallow something. And then a few moments later the grip on his hair lessened and then disappeared. Izuku fell to the floor as the man did the same. The man fell back and landed on his back. Then a small snore told Izuku that he was asleep. As Izuku stood up, pain flared up in his side. So he held a gentle hand to his side and felt that 3 of his ribs were fractured. He knew he should probably leave to get medical attention. But he still had a mission to complete. He just couldn't run into anyone else. Walking slowly down the hallway, Izuku continued to explore the underground bunker. Over the next hour, Izuku slowly explored the underground bunker. He managed to stay quiet as he thoroughly checked each room. He came across rooms that were filled with different illegal materials, from guns to drugs, but those weren't a part of his mission. It would just add more to the charges against the Shy Hasekai, but weren't the main catalyst, so Izuku left those rooms alone but marked the door frame with the same PV that wouldn't be noticeable unless someone was looking for it. The task might have been boring to any normal person, but to Izuku it was an important part of being a hero. Gathering information was a vital part of defeating an enemy. It could show someone their opponent's decision-making, their goal, and the ways they would go about achieving their goals. In the moment, it was important to finding out how the Shy Hasekai was able to create a drug that would temporarily block a person's quirk. And it was obvious from their past, and despite the fact they had made deals with the government to keep some of their power, the Shy Hasekai had not informed the government about their development showed they weren't looking to be selling the quirk-destroying drug to pro-heroes, meaning they were looking to the opposite side of the fight for buyers, meaning villains. Villains that won't hesitate to use the drug to momentarily take away a pro-hero's quirk, and after the first showing it won't be long until all the villains would pay anything to get their hand on the drug. As Izuku thought over this, he continued to explore the underground bunker until 2 voices caught his attention. He quickly flattened himself against the wall and walked up to the corner of the hallway. Peering around the corner, Izuku saw the edge of a jacket, and determining it wasn't headed towards him, he disappeared back from around the corner. As he listened to the conversion, he closed his eyes to hear better and hopefully get a clue as to where they were manufacturing the quirk-destroying drug. "You sure we have enough blood for the next batch?" the first voice asked, and Izuku noticed it was a little muffled. "We do. The last batch only lasted 12 hours, but with the revised formula, this batch should be able to last 24 hours. That kind of power should get more of our hesitant buyers to rethink what they do with their money. It won't be long before the Shy Hasekai will rise to its old power. Then I'll be able to rid the world of its sickness," the second voice said, sounding more muffled than the first voice, making it a bit hard for Izuku to understand what it was saying. Izuku was confused by why the voice was so muffled, then thought back to the man he had just handled and the guards he had seen through the windows. They were all wearing masks, but besides the man, none of the guards had been wearing masks that should have muffled their voices that much. "With the progress we're making, how long before the formula is complete?" the first voice asked, causing Izuku to focus on the answer as it would give the pro-heroes a timetable for dealing with the Shy Hasekai. "Within the next year. But now we just need to give the underground a taste of this new drug. Once the right people think that they can erase a hero's quirk for good enough time, then they'll be willing to pay anything for the final product. Then this hero sickness will be eradicated from this world," the second man said. "Kairia, return Eri to her room once she wakes up." Risking the mission, Izuku slowly moved forward and looked further around the corner. As the hallway filled Izuku's vision, he spotted 2 men and took in what they were wearing. The first man with the less muffled voice was completely hidden under a gray cloak. The only other article of clothes that could be spotted was the man's black shoes. The second man was shorter of the pair, and from behind Izuku could see the man's short brown mask and the straps of his mask. Further down, the second man was wearing a green jacket that had purple feathers around the collar and over the shoulders. Izuku watched and waited as the men disappeared down the hallway and around the corner. As he waited, he talked about what he had heard. The drug was still in its early stages, which was good news, but the complete product could be finished within the year. That might sound like enough time, but with everything that pro-heroes and the government had to deal with on the daily, it could take some time before word got passed along to the right people. That's why it was so important to get the information to Mero, as he would be about to fast-track and get a raid team ready much sooner than usual. But most importantly, Izuku might have found the manufacturer. The man in the green jacket had looked back at the open door. Was it possible that the scientist behind the drug was working within that room? If Izuku was able to get to that room and kidnap the scientist, it would be possible to stop the production of the drug entirely. Moreover, the scientist would know how to create a cure against the drug that could be used until all that had been produced was used up. With the thought of getting that person into Mero's hand, Izuku pushed off the wall and quietly walked down the hallway. Izuku quietly crept up the door and looked inside. He saw a woman sitting in a chair, reading a book. Was this the scientist, Eri? No, the man said Eri was asleep and Kiara was supposed to watch over her. That was who the woman was. But why was she having to watch up over Eri? Had she fallen asleep from working all day? Looking through the crack, Izuku looked away from Kairiya and around the room. His eyes fell on a bed. That must be where Eri was sleeping. But that raised the question of why if she had to be watched over. Was Kairiya there to make sure that since Eri was the manufacturer of the quirk-destroying drug, nothing happened to her? If that was true, then getting Eri out of here, by force if needed, and getting her into Mero's hand was Izuku's goal. The production of the drug would be slowed and Mero could integrate Eri and get enough information about the drug to get a warrant to be used by the pro-heroes. He just needed to deal with the guard. Izuku looked back at Kairiya and looked her over. She was sitting in a chair with her attention on reading the book in her hand. Izuku could almost laugh at how bad of a guard Kairiya was. If Izuku worked fast, he could knock Kairiya out and get Eri out of the hideout while she was still asleep. The only issue was that Kairiya's chair was positioned in a way that the doorway would be in her peripheral vision. So if Izuku tried to run in, Kairiya would notice, and chances were she had an easily accessible way to alert everyone else in the bunker. Izuku debuted over how to direct Kairiya's attention. But then he recalled a skill that he and Bakugo had learned that Mero had thought was pretty stupid. With a smile, Izuku reached into his back pocket and pulled out a single yen. Izuku rolled the coin in his hand as he positioned it to be able to roll it into the room and hopefully direct Kairiya's attention to where he wanted it to go. This could give him enough time to get close enough to knock her out. Positioning the coin between his thumb and index finger, Izuku flickered the coin into the room. The coin rolled into the air for a bit before hitting the ground and rolling. It moved across the floor towards Kairiya. Though it had barely made a sound, the movement caught Kairiya's eye. She closed her book as she looked at the coin and watched it roll in a small circle before landing a foot away from her. Curious about what the coin was, she leaned forwards out of the chair and reached for the coin. As her hand grabbed the coin, a knee was delivered straight to her nose. The blow forced her head up and she saw who her attacker was. A young teenager in a black suit of some kind. He didn't look happy as he drew his fist back. Kairiya's hand shot into her pocket where she had a button that would raise the alarm of the whole bunker. Yet as her finger gripped the button, Izuku brought his right fist down. Right before Izuku's fist connected, he transformed his right arm and the barrel shot out. The barrel of his rifle shot forward and rammed into Kairiya's forehead. Kairiya's eyes rolled back up into her head as she fell backwards and passed out. However, her head never hit the floor as Izuku quickly grabbed her shirt with his left hand. If Izuku hadn't stopped her, then her hitting the floor could have possibly alerted the two men who couldn't be too far away. After slowly lowering Kairiya to the floor, Izuku stood up and looked at the bed. From his new angle, he noticed new things. First, the bed was a medical bed, the kind from a hospital with railings on either side, however they were down at the moment. Second, on the opposite side was an IV drip and a heart monitor that was showing a slow and steady heart rate. Strangely, it wasn't beeping. Izuku's eyes then lowered to the occupant of the bed. Izuku wasn't sure what kind of person he was expecting. Perhaps a young woman, maybe in her early 30s, who was a member of the Yakuza or at least with family ties to the Shai Hasekai. Someone knowledgeable in biology, maybe having specialized in quirk biology. Maybe a woman who had felt on hard times and approached by the Shai Hasekai with the promise she could continue some illegal studies as long as she created drugs for them. What he was not expecting was to see a little girl, no older than 5 or 6 years old. Yet that was what Izuku was looking at, causing him to close his eyes and rub them. When he opened his eyes again, the same picture greeted him. This time Izuku noticed new things. Eri was wearing a tattered and torn hospital gown that had lost its color a long time ago. Her white hair, well, Izuku assumed it to be white as that was the only color he found besides black grim and brown dirt, was in knots and hung loosely around her shoulder. Izuku's eyes then fell on Eri's face. Her cheeks were sunk and pale, she had dark rings around her eyes, and her eyebrows and forehead were constricted as would be normal if someone was feeling pain. The last thing was a small tan horn that sat on the hairline of her right side. Izuku then noticed Eri's arms were covered in medical gaze. Confused about this, Izuku tiptoed around the bed and lifted one of Eri's arms. He didn't fail to notice that Eri's entire body flinched at his touch. He tried not to think about that too much, as he slowly worked the gauze, eventually managing to unravel a small section. As the gauze fell on the bed, Izuku got a good look at Eri's skin, and what he saw was horrifying. It was pale like Eri's face, but what was worse were the scars littering the little girl's arm. From Izuku's training, He could tell these were not the kind a kid got from accidents, like falling over on their bike or getting cut by something. No, they were narrow, straight, and surgical in nature, the kind that can only be made by a surgical blade. And some weren't straight, meaning the blade hadn't been handled by a skilled hand. Suddenly a lump formed in Izuku's throat. His mind thought over everything and added something new to the progress. The man in the gray cloak had mentioned blood and how it was being used to create the drug. Izuku looked back down at Eri, the scars over her arms, the IV drip connected to her other arm. It was clear it was her blood that was being used and she had just gotten out of a session. That's why she had to be watched while she slept. She wasn't here willing and the man in the green coat feared her trying to run away. But that wasn't the worst part. Her dirty knotted hair, the discolor of the hospital gown, the fact she was only getting an IV after having her blood drawn, the fact she was showing signs she was in pain. Izuku's blood began to boil as he realized that Eri was being abused and neglected by the shy Hasekai. They weren't just taking her blood, but they were just leaving her to recover, her only source of vitamins being an IV bag. This was beyond child abuse and neglect. This was insanity. Izuku gripped his right fist tightly, and he wanted to find the leader of the shy Hasekai and give him a piece of his mind. But in his anger, Izuku had a moment of clarity as he noticed something. There were no straps holding Eri to the bed. In that moment, Izuku's mission changed from gathering information about the quirk-destroying drug to getting Eri out of the underground bunker. The fact that she might be the source of said drug didn't matter to Izuku at the moment. He only cared about getting Eri to safety. So Izuku quickly walked to the bed and pulled the IV bag from its hook. He then attached it to his belt, afraid that it was Eri's only source of vitamins and nutrients. And from the state of her face, she needed anything she could get. Izuku then pulled off the electro pads that were connected to the heart monitor. And as it flatlined, he was happy that there was no sound to it. But that all finished, Izuku scooped Eri out of bed. Noticing she flinched again. Then, as if sensing he didn't mean any harm, Eri let out a slow breath and rested the side of her head against his chest. Before moving on, Izuku held 2 fingers against Eri's neck and felt her heartbeat. It felt forced and strained, but it slowly became relaxed and calm, matching his own. Izuku turned around and looked over at Kairia. While Izuku wasn't completely sure of her involvement in this, it was clear she was involved a bit, and that made Izuku's blood begin to boil again. Izuku was happy Aro was asleep for the next part, because as he turned he began walking to the door. He drew back his foot and kicked Kairia hard in the side of the head. If Kairia wasn't unconscious earlier, then she was now. Izuku could see blood coming from Kairia's ear, yet he didn't feel that did justice for what Eri had had to live with. As Izuku walked over to the door, he could feel it within himself. Once again, that burning feeling to find whoever was running the shy Hasekai and make them pay. Make them beg for mercy, and then when they beg for it the most, kill them. To make them understand the pain and torment they caused a little girl. The only reason Izuku wasn't was because he knew he needed to get Eri to safety. And the prospect of having to fight the shy Hasekai wasn't looking great. Even if he could get to the boss and kill them, then he would just be arrested. He wasn't a hero yet, and even if he was sure his mother wouldn't let him get away with that. Izuku sighed at that thought, as he leaned out of the door to make sure the coast was clear. Seeing no one in the way, Izuku slipped into the hallway and began walking back to the entrance, doing his best to remember the path back to the stairs. Izuku knew he was going in the right direction when he came across the still unconscious man from earlier. It was a right, left, straight, right, then left to the stairs. Izuku kept his footsteps quiet and his senses attuned to the sounds around him, and he picked something up. Just as he was able to round the last corner, he saw the barrel of a guard's gun appear. Shoving himself against the wall, Izuku shifted most of Eri's weight to his right arm, allowing him to reach up with his left hand and twirl a bullet. His fingers, still having blue hair dye, worked the bullet into a tranquilizer. As soon as the guard met eyes with Izuku, he opened his mouth to yell, but Izuku was faster and shoved the blue bullet into the guard's mouth. The guard swallowed the bullet and then immediately passed out. Not worrying about the god's fall making noise, Izuku quickly adjusted his hold on Eri, as she had slipped a bit during the attack, and then stepped over the guard. It was a clear path up to the stairs and the ground floor. Izuku easily slipped out of the secret pathway and walked his way to the front of the house. The guard rotation just occurred, so the front of the house should be empty. Yet Izuku's timing was off, as he found out when he walked into the front room of the house. He walked just as the guard turned around to move on. She immediately spotted Izuku and raised her gun and flashlight, training them on. Izuku did his best to remain calm as a fully loaded gun was pointed at his chest. It was his first time. All the other times it had been a practice gun. But those experiences did help him remain calm for the most part. "Who are you and what's with the little girl?" the woman yelled as she pulled out her phone and set off an alarm. The light of the building turned on and Izuku would hear a muffled alarm. Izuku gripped Eri with his left arm as he slipped his right arm forward. He only had a few seconds before the front room was filled with guards. The moment he could, Izuku transformed his arm. Iri's legs now tangling over the body of the rifle, and aimed it at the guard. Thinking of a combination of bullets, Izuku flexed his right and a gunshot rang out, raised his right arm. First, he fired an orange bullet that went off with a flash, and while the guard was distracted, Izuku hit her shoulder with a blue bullet. As the woman fell to the ground, Izuku held loud footsteps closing in from behind. The surrounding guards were responding to the alarm, meaning Izuku needed to make himself disappear. Looking up from the unconscious woman, Izuku eyed the metal gate that separated the front yard from the street through an open window. Izuku quickly switched to a red bullet and shot it at the lock of the front gate. Once he saw the bullet hit the lock, he commanded the bullet to burn the lock away. As the lock glowed and began to melt, Izuku transformed his arm back and tightened his grip on Iri. Then, without waiting for another second, Izuku took off and charged through the front door. Once outside, he was greeted by the cold evening air as he got his foot back under him and ran across the front yard. Once he reached the gate, he kicked it open and took off across the street and towards the alleyway that hid his bike, as it was his best chance of getting away. As he crossed the street, Izuku stole a look back and saw several Yakuza guards in the front room. One spotted him and pointed him out, and then all began to chase him outside the building. Through Project Velocity, Izuku was fast, able to compete with many pro heroes that didn't have speed enchanting quirk, yet he had to carry Iri. The Yakuza was closing in as Izuku got to his bike. He barely had enough time to throw his helmet now and get on his motorcycle. After grabbing some discarded rope, Izuku began to secure Iri, tying the rope around her shoulder, chest, and legs. Izuku then looped the rope over his shoulder and crossed them behind his back, then pulling the last of the rope around his stomach. Izuku tied the two ends off, creating a makeshift sling to hold Iri tight against his body. As Izuku turned his motorcycle on, he heard a bullet hit the cement wall right next to his head. Izuku quickly looked up and saw several Yakuza guards standing in front of him. All had their guns drawn and pointed directly at him. Izuku calmly moved his hands to the handles and revved the engine, causing many of the Yakuza to grip their weapon more tightly. In this kind of standoff, the first to react would have the advantage. Izuku looked in his side mirror and saw the way behind him was clear, and as it was obvious he wasn't going forward, he would have to go back. With that idea in mind, Izuku shot his right arm forwards, and once it was transformed, shot an orange bullet right at the feet of the Yakuza guards. Without waiting for the flash, Izuku shifted his vehicle in reverse and tore out of the alleyway. Once he was out on the street, Izuku hit the brakes and turned the wheel, causing his back tire to yell as Izuku whipped his motorcycle around. Once the tires stopped, Izuku was thrown back into the side, quickly shifted his motorcycle out of reverse and into first. Releasing the brake, Izuku shot forwards. As he left the Shai Hasekai behind, Izuku had seen a hospital coming into town. It was only a few miles away. Yet despite how badly Iri needed a hospital, it would be the first place the Yakuza would look. So getting help for Iri would have to wait until they were out of town and out of Shai Hasekai's grip. So as he checked his mirror every few seconds, Izuku directed his bike through the town and onto the freeway. After climbing the on-ramp, Izuku twisted the throttle as fast as he could, not letting off of it, even as he switched gears as he climbed the speedometer. Nusutafu was an hour and a half away, but with how Izuku was driving and how clear the road was, he could easily get there within 30 minutes. Hopefully, Iri would be able to survive that long. As Izuku shot down the road, he could feel his mind working overtime as it kept track of all the cars around him, watching to see if any slowed down and began to follow. And just as luck, 20 miles after getting onto the freeway, he spotted a minivan a few cars back, and it was quickly catching up to him, until it was right behind him. Then the side door swung open and several Yakuza thugs leaned out. Izuku nearly swerved and lost control as the bullet began flying past him. Thinking fast, Izuku depressed the clutch and shifted down a gear, allowing the RPM of his bike to shoot up and increase his acceleration. This allowed him to push a bit more speed out of his bike as he tried to put some distance between him and the van full of Shai Hasekai members. Unfortunately, the vehicle was able to keep up, and the Shai Hasekai thugs were getting closer with their aim, forcing Izuku to steer side to side, doing his best to dodge the bullets to make sure neither hit him nor he would have started to shoot back. He had the training and know-how, but with Iri also on the bike, Izuku wasn't sure he would be able to keep control and they would end up crashing. The only thing he could do was try and lose the Shai Hasekai. As he thought of a plan, a bullet grazed his left shoulder. Pain shot through his arm, nearly making him lose control. Izuku clenched his teeth as fought to keep control of his motorcycle. Izuku kept his breath steady as he worked to keep his vision clear. That's when he spotted a large semi-truck only a few yards ahead. It was in the second lane, and if he got around it, Izuku could disappear into the far right lane. Izuku wheeled his motorcycle forward until he passed the semi-truck. Without so much as a warning, Izuku shot over to the right-hand lane and turned off all lights. Easing off the gas, Izuku disappeared from the van's view behind the truck. Knowing the Yakuza knew where he had gone, he worked his way to the back of the truck, and just as he saw the brake lights of the van, Izuku swerved over to the left into the original lane. He sped up until he was level with the cab of the truck. Izuku saw the truck driver look at him, more specifically Eri. Izuku saw the truck driver look over at the van and then back at Izuku. The truck driver winked and then jerked his vehicle to the right. Izuku heard the sound of metal scraping against each other, then he heard the sound of cement breaking. He slowed down in enough time to see the van full of Yakuza members flipping over the freeway divider. It landed on the other side of the freeway and quickly slid to a stop. Now that danger was no longer an issue, Izuku refocused on the road. In less than 30 minutes his exit was coming up, and when it arrived Izuku directed his motorcycle to the ramp. As he went down the ramp and disappeared into the city, Izuku finally slowed down and switched his headlights back on. At the first intersection, Izuku directed his motorcycle to Musutafu General. Call Fumiko Mero and Inko Midoriya, Izuku said into the microphone that was in his helmet. Izuku and Eri might be out of danger, but that didn't mean the night was finished. Mero would need to know what he found, and the only person he trusted to know what to do with Eri outside of medical terms was Inko. So as Izuku breezed down the street, he waited for the phone line to connect. It was almost the dead of night, with no cars around, so Izuku didn't worry about blowing through an empty intersection despite the light being red. It also helped that he had a scanner in his helmet that could pick up on the signal used by police speed guns, something neither Inko or Mero knew about. So as long as the scanner didn't go off, Izuku kept his speed high. He knew he needed to get Eri medical assistance as soon as possible. Even if a cop tried to pull him over, he knew very well how to lose them. Izuku kept an eye on the two contact phones that were in the corner of his vision and then saw both calls were picked up at the same time. The moment the lines connect, Izuku got an earful from both mentor and mother. "Zuzu, where did you go?" Inko asked, her voice filled with only small concern. She had seen the notes, but that didn't stop her from worrying. She always worried when he was whisked away for a mission. She knew the kind of career her son was going into, but she was his mother. She was always about to worry about him. "What did you find?" Mero asked, as he had been expecting Izuku's call earlier. Yet he had no idea how large the bunker was going to be, so he gave Izuku the benefit of the doubt. There was a bit of silence before all hell broke loose as Inko yelled, "Mero, I thought the boys had until the UA entrance exam to rest. What are you doing spending my boy out on a mission late at night?" "Mom, I'm fine, really," Izuku said. "But Mero, I found a bit more than was required. I found something that will put the Shy Hasekai out of business for good. Child abuse, child neglect, and illegal experiments were sure to get the ball rolling." But as the guard that Izuku had shot proved, not everyone in Shy Hasekai knew about Eri, so the illegal firearms, narcotics, and overall Yakuza behavior was sure to tear the rest of the organization apart. Yet at the moment Izuku was only worried about Eri. "The Yakuza!" Inko screamed even louder. Izuku almost swerved off the road as his mother's yell made his ears start to ring. He won't be surprised if she had yelled loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Mom, I said I'm fine. Mero, what I found is nothing you're going to believe over the phone. You need to meet me at Musutafu General," Izuku said, taking a corner more quickly than he should have, but Eri was starting to stir. He needed to get to a safe location so he could handle how she reacted, as evidence was not pointing to a positive reaction. And if Eri woke up on the bike Izuku was sure to crash in the middle of street, she was bound to run away. "The hospital," Inko yelled, now prepared. This time Izuku was able to keep control of his vehicle, and just in time as the hospital came into view, its outside light shining like a beacon of hope. Izuku twisted the throttle of his bike and shot his speed up by another 5 kilometers. "Mom, I said I'm fine. It's for who I found," Izuku said as he pulled up into the visitors' parking lot next to the hospital, leaving his bike out in the open, not taking the time to deal with the ticketing system of the large parking structure. As he turned off his motorcycle, he looked up and saw that snow was starting to fall. He hadn't realized how cold the winter night was starting to get. He would need to get inside. Both he and Eri had to deal with hypothermia. "Midoriya, who did you find?" Mero asked. Izuku was only supposed to take a look around. What could he have possibly found that was so much of a cornerstone to the Yakuza? The key to the Shy Haseki's new drug. "Get to the hospital as soon as you can. I'll be waiting for both of you," Izuku said, then ended the call. He didn't need to hear his mother yelling again. Izuku slipped his helmet off and slipped it over the handle. Izuku then pulled out his knife and cut the rope from around him and Eri. He didn't want to give the hospital the wrong impression. Izuku then slipped off his bike and walked as quickly as he with his now broken ribs and injured shoulder over to the sidewalk, and then to the front doors of the hospital. Inside was the typical waiting front room of a hospital. Chairs and tables were set around the room with paintings and potted trees. A receptionist was sitting at her desk, and behind her were 2 sets of metal double doors that led to the rest of the hospital. When the sliding doors opened for Izuku, the receptionist didn't even look up. If she heard the door opening, she didn't care about it. "I need a doctor now. I have a little girl that needs medical assistance," Izuku yelled. The receptionist looked at Izuku with a strange look. It wasn't every day she saw a teenager dressed in all black with an IV bag attached to his hip, carrying a little girl in a worn-out hospital gown that had wrapping all around her legs and arms. She had plenty of strange injuries from all different kinds of people, but this easily took the cake. To make matter more stressful, Eri chose that moment to wake up. She looked up and met Izuku's purple eyes, then began to freak out. She yelled as she tried to get out of Izuku's arm. Yet Izuku's grip wasn't loosening anytime. She had to get back before the man found her again, before anyone was killed. She didn't want anyone else to die. The man was always angry when she tried to run away, and he always made the next session hurt even more. "Let me go. Let me go. If he finds you, he'll kill you too," Eri screamed. Luckily, the receptionist was the only other person besides Izuku at the front. Eri, it's okay, you're safe. No one is going to hurt you," Izuku said, dropping to his knees in an attempt to hug Eri more tightly. Yet this just made Eri start to scream louder and fight against Izuku's hold even more. Others have said that, but he always finds me and kills them. I don't want him to kill any more people. Please let me go," Eri said, fighting with the little strength her body held. She tried punching yet even as she hit his left shoulder, he didn't let go. He didn't care how much she pleaded or how much danger he was in from being found by this man. He wasn't going to let go. He won't let her go back to the Shy Hasekai. Izuku looked at the receptionist, who had seemed to freeze. "Get a doctor, goddammit." The receptionist unfroze and ran off to find a doctor. As Izuku held on to Eri, he could feel her heartbeat getting dangerously high, a clear sign she was going into shock. With how unhealthy she was, Izuku didn't want to risk her getting more injured, but what was more clear was that the normal method of preventing someone from going into shock was not going to work. Izuku reached into one of his side pouches and covered his finger in blue hair dye. He worked quickly to weave a small bullet. Once the bullet was formed, he looked at Eri and said, "Sorry." He then shoved the small bullet into Eri's mouth, then covered her mouth with his hand. That just made Eri freak out even more, but it got her to swallow the bullet. She didn't immediately pass out as Izuku expected, a thought he immediately stored in the back of his mind to come back to later. Luckily, it appeared she was starting to calm down, as her breath became more controlled. Once she began to cry, Izuku removed his hand, allowing Eri to say, "Please, he'll find me, then he'll kill you. I don't want anyone else to be killed because of me. He'll do anything to find me." "Eri, that's your name, right?" Izuku asked, and Eri nodded through her tears. "I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's okay. This bad man, he's not going to find you again. If he does, I'll be there to protect you, I promise you that." Eri shook her head hard, as tears continued to flow down her cheek, and she said, "No, you don't know what he can do. He breaks and rebuilds me. I don't want him to do the same to you." Eri cried a bit more than she slumped into Izuku's arm, the bullet finally taking effect. Izuku easily took Eri's weight as his heart broke in two. What could this man have done to her that made her so afraid of him, and how did it connect to the Shy Hasekai's quirk-erasing drug? He thought back to the underground bunker, and all the medical equipment. She was being used and worse mistreated, and that was enough to make Izuku promise he wouldn't let Eri out of his sight anytime soon. Izuku was so focused on this thought that he didn't notice a doctor running up to him. When the doctor first saw Izuku, he quickly ran around. Once he reached Izuku, he dropped to his knee and looked over the teenager in front of him. What the hell happened? Her bleeding son being closer gave the doctor a good look at Izuku's blood-stained shoulder, and now he could hear Izuku's labored breathing. This shocked the doctor, as Izuku barely looked old enough to start high school, but had gotten into some kind of accident to cause his injuries. "I'm fine, Eri. She needs your help more. She's malnourished and hasn't gotten enough sun." Izuku said that these weren't the worst injuries he had received. Training with Bakugo often left mild burn marks, and Izuku had survived those, and to Izuku those injuries were worse. Eri's condition was worse and had been sustained for longer. The doctor looked confused and then spotted Eri curled up against Izuku's chest. What little calm smile the doctor tried to portray was gone the moment he looked over Eri. Pale skin, dirty hair, signs of malnourishment, old medical grays over his arm and legs, under which she looked to be frail and weak. He let out a small F-432K, then said, "Come with me. I can help both of you." The doctor then helped Izuku to his feet. Izuku carried Eri as he followed the doctor to a recovery room. After walking through the pair of doors, they walked down the hallway a bit, then the doctor opened a door which he directed Izuku into. In the room, Izuku laid Eri on the bed and then handed the IV bag over to the doctor. As the bag was nearly empty, the doctor needed to switch it out for a new one that was loaded with vitamins. As the doctor unlocked the empty bag and attached his new one, then slipped it onto a hook, Izuku walked over and sat down in a chair. After hooking Eri up to a heart rate monitor, the doctor then turned his focus to Izuku. Izuku didn't bother saying he was well. He knew he wasn't, as the adrenaline was starting to disappear, nor was he as prideful as Bakugo not to accept help. He needed say anything as the doctor, after putting on a pair of gloves, cut the stealth shirt off of Izuku's shoulder. With the shirt out of the way, the doctor looked over the wound. It was still slowly bleeding, and the skin around it started to turn purple. It was clear it was an entrance wound, but when the doctor looked at the front of Izuku's shoulder, he couldn't find one. With that information, the doctor cocked an eyebrow. Son, the bullet that hit you is between your acromioclavicular and coracochromial, and it's still in your shoulder. How are you still conscious? The doctor said. Izuku had arrived at the hospital, brought in a little girl and carried her to the room without so much as a show of pain. If it wasn't so disturbing, the doctor would actually be impressed, both in a good way and a bad way. Don't worry, I have a lot of experience with bullets and firearms, Izuku said, semi-aware of how bad that sounded without much context. It probably looked like he found her he passed out from some narcotic and he got shot as he got her out. That was probably the doctor's first assumption with everything he saw. I'll need to get the tools to pull it out. Are you comfortable waiting for a few minutes? The doctor asked. Izuku nodded as he leaned forward, resting his right arm on his knee in an effort to take the weight off his ribs and shoulder. It helped a bit, but he could still feel the fire of pain radiating from his shoulder and his ribs. The doctor left quickly and Izuku was left alone to watch over Eri. As Izuku waited for the doctor, he looked over at Eri. When he first found her, she had been hooked up to medical equipment, yet that first time her face showed signs of pain and worry. Now as she slept in the hospital bed, her face was relaxed and she showed signs of taking deep breaths. She appeared to be in a deep sleep, getting much needed rest that she was unable to get before. Izuku watched Eri's chest steadily rise and fall with her breath. He didn't notice the doctor walking back into the room until the doctor held a soda in front of his face. You can't drink yet and painkillers would take too long to kick in and you'll bleed to death. So I figured this would help numb the pain, the doctor said, as Izuku accepted the ice-cold soda and took a small sip. It felt nice going down Izuku's throat and came his mind something else to focus on. Thanks, Doc, Izuku said. The doctor smiled and nodded as he walked back around Izuku and examined the bullet wound once again. He grabbed disinfect wipes from the counter and gently wiped the mess of bleed and pus. Izuku only flinched when the doctor applied too much pressure. Eventually, the wound was clear and the doctor produced the tools needed to extract the blood. 2 pairs of forceps and a knife. Using the knife, the doctor cut away the scar tissue that was already starting to form, then into the wound, making enough room to slip the first pairs of forceps into the wound to hold it open. With the second pair of forceps, the doctor slid those deep into the wound until he felt them push up against the bullet. Izuku's shoulder exploded in pain as the forceps gripped the bullet. Foregoing the soda, Izuku bit down hard on his sleeve to keep himself from yelling. As water started to pool along the edges of his eyes, he could feel the forceps move out, pulling the bullet along with it. It felt like a red-hot knife was slowly cutting through his shoulder until the bullet was out and Izuku's shoulder could relax and Izuku felt himself take a deep breath. The doctor dropped all of his tools into the sink and ran the hot water to clean the blood off of them. As his tools sat in the sink, the doctor walked back to Izuku and began to wrap his shoulder in gauze. As the doctor did this, Izuku took a small sip of his soda. The sweet taste gave him something other than the pain to focus on. Once his shoulder was tightly wrapped, the doctor cut away the rest of Izuku's shirt and saw the bruising around Izuku's ribs. Stand up, the doctor ordered and Izuku listened. After he stood up, the doctor worked to locate the 3 ribs that were broken. With a sigh, the doctor set the ribs back into their proper orientation and then wrapped Izuku's lower chest in gauze. Once that was done, he looked Izuku in the eyes and said, "You don't mind telling me what you and the little girl were caught in? I know teenagers can get into some stupid stuff, but clearly this isn't your first time having to be patched up like this. I have heard grown men scream like a newborn over a dislocated shoulder." Izuku worked quickly on what to tell the doctor without revealing too much classified information. As he did, he felt the strong impression to tell the doctor the truth. He recognized this feeling. Mero had made sure Izuku and Bakugo had trained against several mind-altering quirks. They couldn't fight against the strong ones, but they able to notice the feeling of them. "Your quirk, you're using it," Izuku said, in an attempt to stop himself from saying the wrong thing and give himself more time to fight against the doctor's quirk. "Train 2. My quirk passively persuades people to tell me the truth, makes it easier to understand when someone is lying about an accident. But it only works when I'm being truthful myself. So I have to be honest right now. I know these wounds weren't from a dumb dare or coming across the wrong people. The little girl makes that evident enough," the doctor said, looking Izuku in the eyes. Izuku held his tongue until he forced himself to say, "Sorry, doctor, but all I can tell you is that it deals with people from the Yakuza, Japanese mafia. Well, it seems you're on their bad side, so that means you're a good person. Then again, I should have been able to guess that since you brought the girl here," the doctor said as he stood up. He walked over to the sink and turned off the water, before drying his tools and slipping them back into his pocket. He walked to the door but stopped when Izuku said, "Hey doc, there's going to be 2 people coming and asking for Izuku Midoriya. They'll be looking for me." The doctor nodded, then said, "I'll inform the front desk to be on the lookout for them. Now get some rest as you wait for them." Izuku nodded and slowly leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes and listened to the heart monitor giving off a steady beat. His mission might have been to give information on the Shy Hasekai, but he had managed to save a little girl. He was a hero, a thought that got a smile out of him. After all of his hard work and years of training, he wasn't even in UA yet, he was already a hero. Over the next few minutes, Izuku dozed in and out of conscious. The heart monitor told Izuku Eri was still alive, so he wasn't so worried, and it provided a steady beat for Izuku to relax too. Eventually, he managed to doze off. The pain of his shoulder and ribs went to the back of his mind as he did so. Then, after what felt like an eternity and only 1 minute, he was rudely awakened by the sound of hurried footsteps. At first, he panicked and thought the Shy Hasekai had followed him, but then he forced on the footstep. There was 2 pairs. With how important Eri seemed to be, the leader of the Shy Hasekai would have sent more than just 2 person, and only 1 pair sounded like it was trying to get to the room, while the other seemed to be trying to stop the first pair but was only successful in slowing them down. That told Izuku everything he needed to know who was coming to his room. "Mero, I swear if you don't let go of me, I will," Inko said as she didn't know whether Izuku was awake or not. Not that mattered as she tried to think of a threat that was appropriate to say in front of her son. "This is Midoriya. Your son is injured, and if I let go you will run to hug him and will mostly injure him further," Mero said as he struggled to hold Inko back. The only reason Mero was able to hold her back was because of how rusty she was with close quarters combat. Mero was sure if Inko had gotten back into training, even for a month, she would be dropping him to the ground in an instant. "Hello, sir. You can let go of my mother. I'm sure she can restrain herself," Izuku said, called through the door. Izuku heard a pair of shoes squeak, and shortly afterwards Inko came running in. She locked eyes with her son, then dashed forward as if to hug him. Fortunately, as she got close, she dropped to her knee, never taking her eyes off of her son. Putting a hand on his right shoulder, Inko began to cry and asked, "What happened? Where did you go?" "I'm fine, Mom. My shoulder was barely hit and my ribs weren't any worse than some days after training," Izuku said, hugging his mom with his right arm. Inko lightly hugged Izuku back as he tried to show that he was lying. Mero then walked in, and if Inko could sense him, and with her quirk Izuku was sure she could, she turned and looked at him. "What mission did you exactly send my son on?" Inko said, her voice dripping with fury. Mero knew that if he said anything other than the truth he would be put in an early grave. Word on the street was that a group of Yakuza was manufacturing a new type of drug, one that could temporarily erase a person's quirk, due to the level of risk that produced. The HPSC Council agreed that a mission needed to be done sooner rather than later. They needed someone to sneak into the Shy Hasekai hideout and have a look around. Due to the short time period, your son was the only one with the level of stealth to complete the mission without a complete plan. He agreed to it, Mero said, adding that last sentence to redirect the blame, showing he was fully prepared to throw anyone under the bus to protect himself from Inko's fury. "I did. It was supposed to be a stealth mission and only a single complication arose. Then I came across Eri. With the information I heard from 2 of the members and everything I saw, I came to the belief Eri was key to the new drug. I did an audible and decided to get her out," Izuku said, then further explained the conversation between the 2 men and how he felt when he first laid eyes on Eri. "That's very kind of you, Midoriya. You saw a young girl who was being abused and wanted to help her. For now, we'll say slowing down the Shy Hasekai became an additional benefit at that point," Mero said, and Izuku nodded, as that was what he cared about. He had slowed the Shy Hasekai. Great, but they still had enough blood to continue their work for who knows how long. But getting Eri out of there had ended something for good, her pain and suffering. "All I cared about was getting Eri to safety," Izuku said, standing up and walking over to Eri, with Inko and Mero following. Eri was so pale and thin, but the worst was when I looked under her bandage. Izuku slipped a finger under the bandage on Eri's left and pulled it all off, revealing the many scars littering her arm. Inko held a hand up to her mouth while Mero's eyes went wide. "When I saw these, I remember how one of the men asked if they had enough blood for the next formula. Seeing these scars, I figured they were referring to Eri's blood. A sweet little 5-year-old who probably didn't understand what was really going on or why it was happening. But it's worse. She claims she run away before, I don't know how many times. But every time this man comes looking for her and kills anyone who's helped her." Izuku had done a good job of staying focused and controlling his emotions. But as he talked about how he felt and his actions, he couldn't stop himself from crying, so Inko put a comforting hand on his back. "Izuku, you did well tonight, and you'll be able to give the HPSC more than enough reason to get a search warrant. Leave everything to me and I'll coordinate with the heroes. The raid should be ready by the 1st of the new year. And with everything we'll find, with everything stacked against them, the trial will be quick and all of them will be in jail before you start high school. I can promise you that," Mero said. "What about Eri?" Izuku asked, looking away from Mero and back down to the white-haired girl who was sleeping between the 3 of them. "That will have to be played by ear. My team and I haven't exactly dealt with children in this kind of way. Mero paused for a bit, some thoughts flashing through his mind. However, there is something that can help speed up the process, and I'll need you to answer honestly. At any point during the rescue, did she awake and meet you? Not just see you, but talk to you, hear your voice? Mero asked, pulling out his phone. Shortly after we arrived, she looked at me and yelled to let her go. That's when she told he about the man. She said people were going to die, that she was going to be destroyed and rebuilt. After that I knocked her out using a blue bullet, Izuku said with a hollow breath. Destroyed and rebuilt sounds like a quirk. I'll have someone take a look through the files of known Shai Hasekai to find a match. Mero then opened his phone and looked at Izuku. Despite how scared she was, she most likely imprinted on you. She saw you in a safe location, away from her capturer. She's going to associate that feeling of safety, not matter how little, with you in this hospital. It might take time, but eventually, she'll feel safe around you. With anyone else, that progress will be 3 times as long. Izuku nodded as he remembered that section of training that he and Bakugo went through. People would hold on to the first hope they got in a dangerous situation, which was the risk of being the first hero on the site of a disaster. The first hero to arrive needed to be the last one to give up. Traumatized kids tried to hold on to any sense of safety, whether that was a person, location, or even an object like a stuffed teddy bear. It was a method to feel safe and distract a kid from their trauma. Yuri might not feel safe, but she would begin to connect that feeling with Izuku, making her feel safe around only him. So it would be best if I stay in the hospital for the time being. Be here for when Yuri wakes up, to make her feel safe, Izuku said, and Mero nodded. What about school? Mero gave a dry chuckle then said, You've been a student since the 2nd grade. I'm sure you can miss a few days. Besides, it's only Thursday and Friday then your Christmas break. If needs be, a deal will be worked out until you can return. Bakugo can bring you homework to do after school. Mero closed his phone, having made a list of what he and his team would do. It was important, but it could wait until tomorrow morning. I'm sure Kaken will like that idea, Izuku said. Bakugo was always pushing himself and Izuku into their training. Once Bakugo learns of Izuku's recovery, he would most likely talk about how he would become better and come out on top. I'm sure Katsuki will be happy to visit you and Yuri in the hospital, Inko said. As soon as the call had ended, she jumped into her car and tore out of the neighborhood. It didn't take long for Mistuki had called her asking where she was headed in such a rush. Midoriya, don't worry about anything else besides recovery. You did well tonight and you deserve the chance to rest. Besides, you've got the UA entrance exam in a month and a half. Won't want you going in there with an injured shoulder. So that's what you need to focus on for the time being, Mero said. Izuku nodded and walked back to his chair, noticing that Inko looked like she wanted to say something, but she stopped herself. She had seen how protective Izuku was acting towards Yuri. Her motherly instincts had flared up when she saw how scarred Yuri's arm was. Yet despite how wounded he was, all Izuku could focus on was protecting Yuri, even if that meant not getting much sleep as he slept in a chair. Mero also noticed and said, Midoriya, with the Shai Hasekai on the lookout for you and Yuri. None of them saw my face, Izuku pointed out as he got comfortable in the chair. Maybe a few had got a quick look at his face in the alleyway, but it was dark and his helmet was on before any could memorize his features. Mero nodded as he continued. Noted, but you're just one person. Even with your training, you're still healing. I'll have a HPSC agent posted outside your room for the coming day, until the main head of the Shai Hasekai have been arrested and accounted for. Now get some rest. You might have won the fight, but there's still the war to finish. Thank you, sir. Thanks, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow then, Izuku said. He leaned back in the chair and looked up at the ceiling. He had had a long night and was ready to go to bed. Once Izuku closed his eyes, his body quickly began to fall asleep, and soon he joined Yuri in the realm of dreams. Inko watched her son sleep for a bit before turning to Mero and nodding towards the door, without so much as a single word before they walked out of their room, leaving the young hero to rest after a long night. Yet while Izuku had done his part, Inko and Mero now needed to do theirs. That began with making sure Yuri was going to be safe and part of a loving family. As the two walked to their respective cars, Mero pulled out a cigarette and slipped into his mouth. Pressing his index finger and thumb against the tip, a small orange glow formed. Inko noticed and said, I thought you gave those up years back. They are filled with herbal leaves. My wife's concern over my health came back to bite me in the butt a year ago. She's been trying to get me to drink more tea, but found I go through my herbal supplements faster by smoking them, Mero said, then blew out smoke that was colored brown. Guess my old habit made it more natural to be smoking throughout the day. Inko nodded. Then before either of them took another step, she pivoted on her foot and slapped Mero across the face, more than hard enough to knock the lit cigarette out of Mero's face, and hard enough to leave a red imprint of her fingers on Mero's cheek. Mero stumbled back a bit to keep his feet under him. Damn it, Inko. You already assaulted me when we first got here. That was before I learned how wounded my son was. You promised not to send either of them on a combat mission until they graduated, Inko said. Mero reached into his pocket to pull out another herbal smoke. But Inko used her quirk to rip the box out of his hand. Really, I explained it already. It was supposed to be a stealth mission, in and out, no contact, no one the wiser that your son was there. But you saw why he had to break protocol. He was the only one available with the skill to do so, to complete the mission without much preparation, Mero said, rubbing his jaw. It might have been a while since Inko trained to be a pro hero, but she always had a strong right hook. Mero was sure if it had been a punch he would be on, but on the ground. There are plenty of other heroes you could have called. People who are actual government-supported heroes, Inko said. She would have started to list some off, but she knew Mero got her point. Heroes that won't have been able to attack without proof. That's why Midoriya went in, to get solid proof and bring it to the HPSC, so it could be handed off to a hero agency that could handle the Yakuza. That's what Project Velocity teaches their heroes, how to bend and act outside the law when it's needed, to act when no one else can. If Izuku hadn't gone in, then that little girl would still be in the hands of someone that saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. Izuku saved Uri because he's a good person and has the skills to be a great hero, Mero said, his voice raising a little towards the end. He took a deep breath before continuing. Both you and I know how the world of heroes is. It's the reason I started the program. Because most become heroes for fame or fortune, but Izuku Midoriya. Mero paused, then continued with, Izuku Tsutsumi is one kind of hero that only happens once in a lifetime. He wants to be a hero for the sole purpose of protecting those around him. That drive was why I was so adamant on training him, to see him rise. And that's the reason why, alongside All Might, he'll be a hero history never forgets. Inko took a few deep breaths of her own before tossing Mero's herbal smokes back to him. I'm sorry. All I can see in him is a growing boy. Barely the same age my sister was when we joined Project Velocity. I don't want his career to be cut short like Kaina's. He is so wounded but fighting so hard to get Eri to the hospital, prioritizing her life over his own, acting like a hero before he should have to. He's not a little boy anymore. That kid, he'll grow up, but he'll always be your son. He'll need you for the rest of his life. Maybe a lot in the coming days, Mero said, lighting another cigarette. We'll have the hospital run a blood test on Eri, see if we can connect her back to her family. But until, maybe even after, if the test doesn't give good results. But for now, Eri is going to recover the best under the watch of your son. As I said earlier, she imprinted on him, the first time she's felt safe in some time. She isn't going to want to leave his side anything soon, and you're gonna have to help me with that. Mero slipped into his car and then rolled down his window. As strange as this is going to say and sound, Izuku Midoriya just became a surrogate father to Eri. So I guess, congratulations, you're a grandmother. Haha, don't make me feel old. Izuku's going to start high school soon. He isn't going to have the time to take care of Eri. Inko said, then the best way to help your son is to make Eri feel safe in your presence as well. Give her another guardian to be around so she won't cling to you, son, as much. I suggest starting out by buying her a treat. Mero said, I thought you didn't have any children of your own. Inko said as Mero turned on his car. I don't. You forget my wife used to work at a daycare. The first trick she learned was how to get a kid to shut up. Stick something in their face. Good night, Mero said as he pulled out of the hospital parking. Inko stood by her car for a bit before getting in, as Mero drove away. She looked back at the hospital and quickly spotted the room Izuku was staying in. She had a feeling that life in the Midoriya household was about to get the flip turned upside down. Despite his broken ribs and injured shoulder and the odd position he was sitting in the chair, Izuku somehow managed to sleep through the night. Whether it was good sleep was the real question. As Izuku yawned and used his right hand to rub his eyelids to wake up, he began to open his eyes only to be immediately blinded by a ray of sunlight that was coming through the cracked window blinds. Blinking around his momentary blindness, Izuku moved his head out of the sun and looked around the room. His eyes fell on her and he gave a small smile when he saw that she was still asleep. Though Izuku must have been sleeping hard, because he noticed that the IV bag had been replaced again. A nurse must have done that in the middle of the night. Izuku stretched only his right arm, as when he tried to stretch his left it yelled in pain. Izuku yawned a bit as he stood up out of the chair and walked over to the sink and turned on the hot water. After letting it warm up for a bit, Izuku cupped the warm water with his hand and then splashed it over his face to fully wake up. As Izuku cleaned his face, he sensed movement coming from the bed. He turned off the water and looked over at Eri. She was curled up at the top of the bed. She looked like she was trying to press her body into the pillow to hide. Her eyes darted around the room a bit, then fell on Izuku. Izuku quickly dried his face and slowly walked over to the bed. He put some of his weight on the side and looked at Eri. How did you sleep? Enough, Eri said in a quiet voice that Izuku almost wasn't able to hear. Are you hungry? Izuku asked, and as Eri shook her head, her stomach growled. Izuku gave the brightest smile he could as he reached over and grabbed the remote that controlled the bed. and the TV and had an intercom to the nurse's office. Izuku pressed the button and a few seconds later the intercom clicked and a nurse said, "Good morning, room 115. How did you sleep? How may I be of service today?" Izuku smiled and said, "Good morning, we slept all right. I am wondering if the kitchen is open for breakfast." He looked over at the clock on the wall, and it was obviously broken as it wasn't early in the afternoon or early in the morning, despite it reading 2:15. "Yes, sir. The kitchen opened a little over half an hour ago. What would you like to order? I can have it sent to the kitchen and have it delivered to you as soon as possible," the nurse said, her voice sounding chipper. Obviously, she was a morning person. Izuku thought about it for a bit. He would like to order something Eri would like to and actually eat, but he hadn't the fainting idea of what she would like to eat. Izuku tried not to think about the food she had been forced to eat from the Shai Hasakia, or perhaps the Laka. Without any idea of what to say, Izuku switched mindsets and thought about what would be best to give Eri to help recovery. "I would like to order katsudon and some apple slices," Izuku said. What he had just got out of a firefight without dying. He deserved to treat himself, and the apples would provide much-needed nourishment for Eri's body to physically recover. "I'll have that sent up as soon as possible," the nurse said. Izuku thanked the nurse and then turned off the intercom. "How do apples sound, Eri?" Izuku asked, turning to the should-be a white-haired girl. "Apples," Eri said, sounding out the word as if it was the first time she had heard it. That made Izuku worry about Eri's education level. Common sense said it was low. If it turned out that she didn't like apples, then Izuku would just go to the list of fruits and vegetables until he found one that Eri liked. Izuku then noticed that Eri was more tightly curled up and she was trying to pull the blanket over herself, something she was finding hard to do as Izuku's weight was holding it from moving. Izuku took his weight off the blanket and Eri quickly pulled it up, covering her body up to her chest. She then gripped the blanket tight as if she was expecting Izuku was going to pull it away. Izuku sighed, putting some weight back on the bed. "Eri, do you know where you are?" Eri shook her head. "You're somewhere safe. You don't have to worry about anyone hurting you." Eri shook her head again, then asked, "Why did you take me away?" "The man doesn't like it when people try to take me away. He tells me that they are trying to corrupt me with a sickness. He kills anyone that tries to corrupt me and says I need to try harder to stay safe." Eri then noticed the bandages around Izuku's shoulder and midsection. They were just like her. "Did the man get you too?" Izuku looked down at his wrappings, just now noticing that he was shirtless. He justified it by the fact that he didn't have a clean shirt and he was happy the wrapping always covered something that would make Eri even more worried. Izuku smiled at Eri and said, "No, this man didn't get me and he's not going to get you either. These are to help with some choice I made to help someone." Izuku thought it was best not to tell Eri the pain he chose to receive to rescue her. Evidence said she would blame herself. "Eri, do you perhaps know the man's name, the one who hurt you?" Eri began shaking her head violently. Then her entire body began to shake as if she was having a panic attack. Her head dropped down to her knees and she began to scream, No, I don't want to remember that. I'm not supposed to know. He doesn't like me knowing his name. He doesn't like it when I tell others." Izuku saw the heart monitor start to jump, so he rushed over to help Eri. He couldn't just knock her with a blue bullet. It wouldn't help her mental state. So Izuku did something that no one had ever done to Eri before, despite his left arm's protest. Izuku told it to shut up and he wrapped Eri in a giant bear hug, squeezing all of his love into her. Then he spoke in a soft and tender voice, "It's okay, it's okay, it's okay. You don't have to think about that man anymore. You don't have to tell me his name. I don't need to know it. You don't have to think about him." Eri calmed down a bit as Izuku rubbed her back in a circular pattern. After a bit, Eri looked at Izuku with her tired and bloodshot eyes. "The man will find me. He'll do anything to find him." Eri spoke in such a defined tone that told Izuku that she was speaking from experience. Then she added something that added a bit more to Izuku's information of what the Shai Hasakia was doing with her. "He told me that I was important to saving the world." Izuku tried to show his confusion over that. They were using her blood to destroy Quirk. How is that saving the world? And do you believe in him, that you're important to saving the world? Obviously. This man Eri feared so much had worked hard to destroy her belief in the world, to make it seem like only he could protect her. It would be hard to save Eri from that kind of world. And the first step to doing that was disproving the lies she had been forced to believe. Eri didn't speak for a moment, just slowly shook her head then said, "He believes the world is sick, that people destroy anything to get anything they want." "What do you believe?" Izuku asked, but Eri didn't say anything. It was as if she was a blank slate, unable to form her own thoughts, only able to repeat what her captor told her. "Eri, do you believe that people want to destroy the world?" "No, because it's so beautiful." That gave Izuku so much needed confidence in being about to help Eri. "I've seen trees in the sky and don't understand why someone would want to destroy them," Eri said, in a small voice as if she was the first she was responding as herself. "But the man says that people are evil and evil people can't be understood." Izuku tried not to laugh at the irony of that. Crazy never knew it was crazy until proven otherwise. Suddenly a knock came from the door and Izuku walked over to it. He opened it and found a nurse on the other side holding out a tray that had Izuku's order on it. "Good morning. Breakfast order for room 115, the nurse said, presenting the food tray. Izuku smiled as he took the food tray and said, "Thank you." He stepped back and used his foot to close the door. Izuku turned around and walked back to the bed, resting the food tray on the foot of the bed. He opened the sliced apple, pulled a slice out and asked, "Hey Eri, I want something for you." "They're called apple slices." "Apple slices," Eri said, tilting her head to the side. Izuku tried to grimace at how often he was being reminded of how horrible Eri's life had been. He had seen a lot and heard a lot, but not having been able to enjoy childhood memories such as enjoying an apple seemed the worst of all. "They are delicious and sweet. I think you're going to like them," Izuku said, setting the food tray on the bed, then climbing up and sitting cross-legged at the foot of the bed. After opening the container, he held out an apple slice and Eri hesitantly reached forward and took it. She slowly raised it to her mouth and took a small bite. As she chewed on the apple, Izuku saw some light come back into her eyes. She quickly ate the rest of the apple slice and then looked at Izuku. Izuku smiled as he handed the rest of the slices to her. As Eri ate her apple slices, Izuku opened his katsuden and readied himself to eat. However, before he could eat, his phone rang. Pulling it out, he saw that it was Henkido. Izuku answered the phone and said, "Hey Henkido, what do you got for me?" "Hey Midoriya, before I can answer that question I need you to confirm the information Mr. Mero gave to me last night. First name, Eri, no last name. Age 5 or 6. Hair, white with a small horn on her hairline. Quirk, unknown but believed to be related to the previously mentioned horn," Henkido said. Izuku looked at Eri as she ate her apple slices, yet she seemed to be intently listening to him. Information confirmed. Izuku heard some keys being clicked and Henkido cleared her throat as if she was about to give a lecture. "All right, it took a bit of digging. Without a blood test from the hospital and with no last name, it was difficult to get past square one. So I began looking at birth records of kids that were missing quirk registration. Longer list than you would think." "How long was the list?" Izuku said, as that seemed like an odd place to begin. Nevertheless, it was a place to begin. "Longer than you think," Henkido said, then yawned. Izuku sighed. Henkido never answered questions in a straightforward way. And what was with her yawning? Had she just woken up? No, this was Henkido, Izuku reminded himself. "Henkido, how much sleep did you get last night?" Izuku asked. Henkido had a horrible habit of forgetting how tired she was, meaning she wouldn't go to bed. "I've been awake since Mr. Mero called me at 2 in the morning. "Why?" Henkido said, her normal energetic voice coming back. She had already forgotten how tired she was. Izuku would have slapped his forehead if he was alone. While Henkido were funny as a kid, as Izuku grew up they began a bit annoying. But Henkido's personality and dedicating easily made up for them. "Henkido, I'm sure that whatever Mero told you to find could have waited until you woke up in the morning. But it was the morning when he called," Henkido said, giving off a "what did I do wrong" tone with her statement. Why did she have to take everything so literally? Izuku sighed then said, "Forget about that. Just tell me what you found." Henkido cleared her throat again then said, "I found a few names. Few of interest, but none of them matched the description completely. Then I figured with Eri being held by the Shy Hasekai, she might have some kind of family connection. A lot of Yakuza parents either don't have their child registered at a hospital or later on have their records destroyed. I went from there and I found something that I believe is the file we're looking for. Riki and Noriko Riina had a child 5 years ago that was born Eri Riine. Eri could be a common name, so I did a further digging into the parents. Riki Riina died nearly 2 years ago, but Noriko Riine, the mother, seems to have dropped off the grid. Like completely. No social media, banking, recording, insurance, housing, work, death certificate, nothing. She stopped existing a month after her husband's death," Henkido said as if revealing the last clue of a massive treasure hunt. Izuku noticed that Henkido had only made one mention of her, clearly focusing on the parents. Clearly, she wanted it to be a massive reveal, so Izuku asked, "What about the daughter, Eri Riine?" "There's no mention of her after Riki's death. However, by digging into Noriko's past I found something interesting. Her father is the boss of the Shy Hasekai, and it seems that's where Eri Riine disappeared to," Henkido said, tapping her finger against her desk showing off her victory. "You have no idea how long it took me to find this information." Izuku guessed at least since 2:30 in the morning, but kept his mouth shut about that. Then lowered his voice to a whisper and said, "So if Eri is Eri Riine, then her own grandfather is experimenting with her blood. Talk about having a horrible family tree." "Not quite. Luckily it seems that despite all that he did as the boss of the Shy Hasekai, Kanon Oda was a family man. He was put into a medically induced coma over a year and a half ago. The first report of the quirk-destroying drug only popped out a little under 6 months ago," Henkido said. "So someone else is experimenting with Eri's blood." Izuku said, "Remember the room that had an old man lying in a bed? Could that have been Kanon Oda? Why was he put in a medically induced coma?" As all roads lead to Roman, all the information present seems to point to the Shy Hasakia's second-in-command, Kai Chisaki, quirk Overhaul. He seems known for his plague doctor mask and his large green coat with purple feathers around the collar. Hankido said. Izuku's mind flashed back to the two men he saw walking out of the room he found Uri in. One of them had a green coat with purple feathers. Hankido, Kai Chisaki, what could he do? I mean his quirk, Overhaul. What does it allow him to do? A few more keystrokes, then Hankido said. I'm looking at his criminal file and wow, there's a lot of science words I don't understand, but in layman terms, Overhaul gives Chisaki the ability to destroy and rearrange the molecules of any object he touches. This power is not limited to inanimate objects, as he can rearrange a people's body even down to the genetic level. This is why it's been so hard to tie him to any murder, as he can clean up and return a fight scene to its fixed state. Wow, sounds like he should have become a doctor. Could have saved a lot of lives, Hankido said, reading off the criminal file on her computer. Overhaul, able to destroy and rebuild anything. That sounded a lot like what Uri said the man did to it. It sounded like she was referring to Chisaki's quirk. Destroy and rebuild within moments. Izuku cursed himself. He was so close to the man that was tormenting Uri for so long. Yet he had no clue. He didn't know what was going on and there was nothing he could do. Hankido, have you passed this information to Mero yet? Izuku asked. Mero had promised that the Shy Hasakia raid would be done within weeks, and Izuku tried not to think about that too much. Now he was wishing it could be done as soon as possible, to see Overhaul behind bars and never be able to hurt Uri ever again. He confirmed he received it. And then I immediately called you. He knows I'm calling you, so he'll have everything squared away when he talks with you next. With the evidence we have, we can easily get a warrant. Then with the evidence we find in the hideout, there's no court that won't find the Shy Hasakai innocent, Hankido said. Thanks, Hankido, Izuku said, then felt a small pull on his sleeve. He looked over and saw Uri holding out the container that held her apple slices. Izuku smiled and then said, do you want more? Uri nodded. Izuku smiled as he turned off his phone, grabbed the remote and told the nurse, can we get a few more apples for room 150? As they waited for a few minutes, Izuku took the time to eat his breakfast, finishing up as more apples arrived. The nurse had a knife ready to cut the apple, but Izuku said he had it handled. Walking back to the bed, Izuku pulled the chair over and sat in it, pulling out a 6-inch knife from the back of his utility belt. Izuku showed Uri how to properly cut the apples and then out the seed. After cutting the first apple, Izuku handed all the slices to Uri, then set about cutting the other 4. Once that was down, Izuku put his knife back in its sheath and then sat back in his chair, grabbing the last, uncut, apple. Then as Uri slowly chewed on her slices, Izuku ate a whole apple, giving her a big smile the whole time. Around noontime, Uri went back to sleep, leaving Izuku alone in the room with nothing but his thoughts. He spent a few minutes using the hair dye from his utility belt to dye his hair and refill the shots he had used in the Yakuza hideout. But that didn't take long. So as the morning turned into the afternoon, Izuku was starting to get a little antsy. While he could stay in one spot, without moving, waiting for the perfect point to take a shot, a skill any good sniper needed, he wasn't one who could stay in a room for very long with absolutely nothing to do. Yet he didn't want to leave Uri alone in the room as he walked around the hospital. Luckily for him, the school was soon out, and hopefully, Bakugo would decide to visit. In the end, it was Bakugo and Mitsuki who came by to visit. When the knock finally came from the door, Izuku felt like he was losing his mind. Before a second knock even had a chance to occur, Izuku was already out of his chair and had the door open. Mover then overjoyed for company. Izuku opened the door and regretted it. Upon seeing her nephew, Mitsuki wrapped Izuku in a bear hug and squeezed, causing his shoulder and ribs to flare up in pain. Aunt Mitsuki, still healing, Izuku said in a pained voice. Mitsuku chuckled a bit then released Izuku. She stepped back and looked over Izuku. He looked well and seemed to be faring all right, all things considered. Your mother called me in the morning and told me what happened. You were so brave saving that little girl, Mitsuki said, then noticed Uri on the bed. Oh, is this her? Izuku heard a finger up to the lips. It would be hard for her, but Izuku knew Mitsuki could be quiet. She's asleep, so be quiet. And be gentle, she's still worried she'll be found. She keeps telling me the Overhaul, the Shy Hasakia's boss, is going to find her and kill me. You were threatened, and you still took the girl, Bakugo asked, staring at Izuku with a confused look. They had the same training, and while Izuku called Bakugo a blockhead sometimes, if there was even a moment that Bakugo could return the favor, it would be now. More like this hasn't been the first time she has been rescued. Apparently she's run off before, but Overhaul always finds her and kills the hero she is with. Izuku explained further. He walked back to his chair next to the bed and sat down. The worst part is Overhaul was using her blood to create a new kind of drug that can temporarily erase quirks. Mitsuki and Bakugo both flinched at that. That's horrible, to treat a little girl for such a villainous goal, Mitsuki said. Tell me about it. As soon as I saw the physical state Eri was in, I wanted to hunt down and make the leader of the Shy Hasekai pay for everything," Izuku said, putting a hand on the bed. As if sensing his hand, Eri slowly reached over and gripped it. It was slow progress, but she was opening up to Izuku. "Well, you did the right thing, nerd, getting her to safety," Bakugo said, giving Izuku a nod that spoke volumes of the respect he held for his friend. Izuku looked at Bakugo and nodded, then said, "What, no boasting how you could have done better. No swearing or rude nicknames. There's a 5-year child in the room. Just be glad I haven't flipped you off. I still think it's stupid that you went in without backup and without a plan," Bakugo said. Mitsuki chuckled a bit and rubbed Bakugo's hair. Bakugo groaned as he tried to get away. Hearing Mitsuki's laugh, Eri began to wake up. After a few moments, Eri opened her eyes and looked at Mitsuki and Bakugo. She panicked and began to move towards Izuku. Mitsuki immediately stopped laughing and Bakugo stopped growling. "Good morning, Eri. You don't have to worry. This is Mitsuki and Katsuki Bakugo. They're friends of mine," Izuku said as Eri reached for him. Izuku pulled Eri off the bed and laid her on his lap. Izuku hugged her tightly as he rubbed her back. He guessed suddenly seeing 2 new people could be scary, especially when one was growling. Eri looked up at Izuku with a confused face and asked, "What's a friend?" Izuku didn't fail to notice the dark look that overcame Mitsuki and Bakugo. It seems they didn't like the thought of a girl such as Eri not being able to live a normal childhood either. A friend is someone you're close to but isn't a family member. Someone you like spending time with, enjoy doing things with, Izuku said as he began to slowly brush Eri's hair. It was dry and stiff in his hand and was coating his hand in a small layer of dirt dust. He needed to get into a bath soon before all the dirt began to affect her health if it wasn't already. "Like what?" Eri said, not to take her eyes off of Izuku. That was a question Izuku never thought he would have to explain in his life. "Well, Kaken, don't use that dumb nickname in front of her. And I are friends. We go to school together. We play games on the weekend. We ride our motorcycles together on long drives. We enjoy going down to the beach and playing in the water. Oh, if we did those things then we would be friends," Eri said. Her voice rose a bit in joy, though it was hard to hear. Izuku felt his heart rate increase a bit, out of anger or joy he wasn't sure. Izuku then promised himself that as soon as he and Eri were out of the hospital he would be anything she would ask to be friends. "You would like to go to the beach and play in the water?" Izuku asked and Eri gave a small nod. "Then how about as soon as we're out of here, we go to the beach? How about Takoba Beach? You boys had worked hard to clear up that beach. If anyone deserved to enjoy it, it's you two," Mitsuki suggested. Izuku looked at Mitsuki and nodded in appreciation for the suggestion. Izuku then turned back to Eri and asked, "Does that sound like fun to you?" Eri gave an empty nod with a no smile. Izuku sighed as he knew it was going to be a long progress until Eri could move on past the abuse and trauma she had experienced. But if anyone could always be there for her, to see her light grow, it would be Izuku and Ninko. They would always be there for Eri, no matter what. "You know it's winter time, right? You would have to wait another 4 months until it was warm enough to go to the beach," Bakugo said, causing Izuku to stick his tongue out at Bakugo. Mitsuki and Bakugo stayed at the hospital until it was evening and they had to return for dinner. They filled the time with playing different card games. Izuku spent most of the time explaining the games to her. At some point, Bakugo jokingly stated they should teach Eri how to play poker, earning him a smack upside the head from his mother and a glare from Izuku. Before they left, Bakugo left Izuku his backpack filled with homework from school, something Izuku would work on once Eri went to bed. Luckily, Izuku and Eri weren't left alone for too long as Inko and Mero showed up around dinner time. Once the knock came from the door, Izuku lifted Eri back onto the bed and walked to the door. Izuku could smell the food before he opened the door, his mouth drooling a bit. Hospital food wasn't too bad, but it was nothing compared to homemade meals. Once he opened the door, Izuku was greeted by the sight of his mother carrying several servings of ramen and Mero carrying a large cheesecake. Izuku invited them in and introduced them to Eri. She was still shy but opened up a bit to Inko while staying scared of Mero, something Inko would hold over Mero's head for a long time. They ate dinner together and enjoyed each other's company late into the evening. But it couldn't be sunshine and rainbows forever. Once Eri fell asleep, the conversation turned more to business. So with the information Henkido gathered, it going to be easy to get a warrant to search the Shy Hasekai's hideout. Mero pointed out he and his team had been working all day to get very ready for the raid. But there was one last detail left to get. An important detail as it was the linchpin to the whole operation, the secret entrance to the underground bunker. Midoriya, you haven't explained where the entrance was. Izuku thought back to the raven statue that hid the stairs well. It's a small shelf with a raven statue on it. You have to press the title pattern down in order. Izuku then showed Mero the pattern to press the title down. Then a section of the wall will move back, revealing a staircase. Thank you. With that information and the warrant, the police and heroes will be able to find enough evidence to arrest any Shy Hasekai member and put them in jail for a long time. Then there is the issue of what to do with Eri. That will be more of a civil case than a criminal case. The court and judge might lean towards trying to find Eri's mother. But with the clear abandonment and endangerment, her choice was, we might not have to fight too hard on that, Mero said as he cut himself another slice of the cheesecake. So then my mother and I would be free to adopt Eri into our family, Izuku said, his eyes and ears perking up with the statement. He noticed how weird that sounded and continued with, you stated yesterday that Eri would imprint on me, free safe around me. Today it was slow, but she began to open up to me. When Aunt Mitsuki and Kaken visited earlier, she began to look towards me for comfort. She even sat on my lap for a bit, Izuku said, looking over at Eri. That is best case scenario. Eri is adopted into your family. However, the hitch that could come with that is, she might not open up to your mother. Right now is a delicate time for Eri to heal. She feels safe around you, but you can't put your life on hold until she feels safe around other people. To make this work, Eri will need to feel safe around your mother or her mind might never heal, Mero said, receiving a nod from Izuku and Inko. Tomorrow, maybe you two could go for a small walk around the hospital. It would do you some good to get some exercise. And it might help Eri start to feel comfortable with you in strange places, Inko said, as finished her slice of cheesecake. She stood and began walking to the door. We'll let you go to sleep. And Ozuzu, take a shower in the morning. Inko then walked out of the room, causing Izuku and Mero to look at each other and laugh. For the next few minutes, Izuku told Mero more about the underground bunker and the different turns he took to get to Eri's old room. Mero nodded at this, as it was an important room to keep the heroes out of. Best to keep any hint towards Eri's involvement as far away as possible. If any hero learned about her, they might ask too many questions and get the wrong kind of people involved. With that decided, Mero began to leave the room, but Izuku stopped him. I just remembered. There are several rooms filled with drugs and firearms. I marked each of the doorways with a small PV. That should help with the search. Thank Midoriya, now get some sleep, Mero said, then left the room. Izuku took the advice and went to sleep as tomorrow going to be important. The next morning Izuku woke up early to give himself enough time to shower before Eri woke up. So after wiping the sleep from his eyes, Izuku grabbed a pair of clean clothes from his backpack and then walked to the bathroom. After waiting for the shower to warm up, Izuku pulled off his clothes, medical wraps included, and stepped in. His body greedily welcomed the water warm as it washed over his sore body, immediately making him wish he could stay there all day. Yet he had some responsibilities that he still had to take care of, so grabbing the bottle of shampoo and bar of soap, Izuku set about cleaning his body. The blood from his shoulder came off easy enough, along with the smell, but there wasn't anything he could do about the bruises around his rib. Once he was finished cleaning himself, Izuku stepped out of the shower to dry off. Then Izuku slipped into a pair of clean clothes, enjoying the soft feeling on his skin. Izuku began to make his way out of the bathroom, but then something caught his eye. He noticed the length of his hair. It was starting to reach halfway down his back. Izuku sighed at this stupid side effect of his quirk. It was always making his hair grow faster than Norma. He knew he should get a haircut. That much was obvious, but right now there were other things that took priority. Finding a loose rubber band in his pocket, Izuku did his hair into a quick ponytail, then looked back in the mirror. He didn't hate it. Maybe he could pull it off. He would just need to grow his hair out a bit more. Done with that situation, Izuku walked over to the tub and closed the drain. He turned the water on again. It was still warm from his shower and waited for it to fill up until it held a few inches. Then turning off the water, Izuku walked back into the room and found Eri patiently waiting for him. She was sitting up and had the blanket around her. And when she heard Izuku's footsteps, she looked up at him. Fear was only present in her eyes for a moment before a dim light replaced it. Good morning, Eri. Did you sleep all right? Izuku asked. Eri responded with a small nod. Would you like to take a bath? If his mother thought he smelled, then Eri couldn't smell any better. But Izuku wasn't going to force Eri to do anything she didn't want to do. Luckily, Eri nodded. Izuku took Eri's hand and helped her hop off the bed, the blanket slipping off and staying behind. He walked her over to the bathroom where the bath was waiting for them, small pillars of steam rising from the surface. Izuku helped Eri out of her hospital gown and undid the bandages around her arm. Izuku did his best not to show any disdain as more and more scars were revealed. He still couldn't get over what she had suffered through. He may never do so. Once Eri was fully undressed, Izuku helped her into the warm water. Though Eri showed no emotion, Izuku could see her body relax in the warm water. It was greedily accepting the warmth from the water, as he had done so with his shower. As her hair was the messiest, Izuku decided to start there. Grabbing a comb from the counter, Izuku used the remaining shampoo to wash and scrub the dirt and grime out and untie the knots from Eri's hair. As more and more dirt was washed out, Eri's pure white hair color was shown more and more. After much work, Eri's hair looked healthy, or starting to. The lack of proper washing and nutrients had made it stiff and hay-like. But at least it now had a chance to heal. Then Izuku looked down at the water, and now it had a sharp brown color to it. Reaching down, Izuku opened the drain, then turned on the faucet. Eri flinched at the loud sound of the rushing water but calmed down as Izuku showed that it wasn't going to hurt her, running his hand under the water to do so. Once all the brown color was gone from the water, Izuku closed the drain and turned off the faucet. The next step of cleaning Eri was washing the dirt off her skin. Izuku grabbed the soap bar and lathered Eri's body in it, bubbles forming over her in the water. As they appeared, Eri poked them and watched them pop. As Izuku cleaned Eri, the water slowly turned brown once again. Once the task of cleaning Eri was finished, Izuku pulled the drain and then grabbed a towel from the railing, which he used to dry Eri off, and once Eri was fully dry, Izuku discarded the wet towel in the sink. He then grabbed another towel, this time using it to wrap Eri in. Izuku then carried Eri out of the bathroom and back to the bed. As Eri sat on the bed, Izuku grabbed the remote and called the nurse's desk. "Hello, this is room 115. Can we get a new kid-size hospital gown?" Izuku said, then looked at all the scars on Eri's arms and legs and some gauze wraps. "Yes, sir, we'll bring those items right away," the nurse said. Izuku thanked the nurse and then released the button. After only a minute of waiting, a knock came on the door and Izuku hurried over. He accepted the gown and wrappings from the nurse, then walked back to Eri. The nurse asked if Izuku needed assistance, but he said could handle it on his own. After closing the door, Izuku turned back to Eri and walked back. He set the gown and gauze on the bed. Then he looked Eri in the eyes. "Eri, would you prefer it if I wrapped your arms and legs again or let them as they are now?" Izuku didn't know if Eri would know what the scars meant. She was young and Izuku knew that a young mind could block or erase traumatic memories. Yet Eri seemed fully aware of what happened to her, even if she didn't fully understand why. But with a hollow look, Eri looked down at her arms and legs. After a few moments, her shoulders dropped and she held out her arms. Izuku nodded, then began to tightly wrap Eri's arms in the fresh gauze. Once both of her arms were wrapped again, Izuku helped Eri into the hospital gown. To finish it all off, Izuku knelt and had Eri hand her legs off the side of the bed. This allowed him to more easily wrap her legs in the gauze. Eri's clothing situation was handled, and Izuku asked her to wait patiently on the bed. Once she agreed to it with the condition that she would still be near him, Izuku was able to slip back into the back room as he did not think seeing his wounds would help Eri recover. Keeping the door open, Izuku knew Eri would be listening to him, so he kept quiet as he removed his shirt. Looking at his wound in the mirror, Izuku felt his body yell in pain whenever he tried to move his left arm. Through the mirror, he saw that it had become irritated, but luckily it had not reopened. Izuku undid the last rolled medical gauze and began to rewrap his wound, his training through Project Velocity allowing him to do so. Once Izuku's wound was properly wrapped, he slowly put his shirt back on and then headed back to the main room, where he found Eri patiently sitting on the bed and looking through the small gaps in the blinds. Izuku walked over and leaned against the bed, catching Eri's attention, though she did not look at him. "Eri, would you feel up to going for a small walk around the hospital? I'm not supposed to leave my room without Karya. The man doesn't like it when I try to leave," Eri said, not moving from the bed. Izuku bit his tongue as he took a deep breath. Eri had lived by a set number of rules and routines, and the slightest deviation ended in punishment, and it was Izuku's job to break Eri out of that shadow. And it would help to start with the little things. "Eri, it will be okay. We won't leave the building, we'll just go explore it for a bit. You'll be able to see the sky and trees again. You said you thought they looked beautiful." Eri looked at Izuku, who did his best attempt at a comforting smile. After a few seconds, Eri gave a small nod and slid off the bed. Izuku quickly gathered up Eri's old gown and wraps and stuffed them in a biohazard bag that almost felt fitting. Izuku and Eri walked to the door and Izuku opened it. Eri looked in the hallways of the hospital and immediately felt overwhelmed by the long and narrow hallways, the many doors that led to different rooms. It reminded her of the underground bunker where she had been captive. She looked up at Izuku and saw a man wearing a suit right next to him. She gave a small yell and hid behind Izuku's leg. Izuku crouched down and gently hugged Eri. "It's okay, that's just Mr. Hisao. He is here to protect you and me. He might look scary, but he would never hit a hair on your head." Eri looked up and saw Mr. Hisao pull off his glass and gave a smile. "He has kind eyes," Eri said, causing Izuku to nod and Mr. Hisao to smile more. "My wife says that's why she married me," Mr. Hisao said with a small hearty chuckle. "Eri, would you like me to carry you around?" Izuku said, pulling a bit out of the hug to look Eri in the eyes. "Sir, you're injured." Mr. Hisao stopped as Izuku shoved his foot into Mr. Hisao's shin. Despite all of his injuries and exhaustion, Mr. Hisao was surprised by the force Izuku was able to generate. Eri shook her head, allowing Izuku to stand up. However, she tightly gripped Izuku's hand. Izuku just smiled as he and Eri held hands. He turned to Mr. Hisao and asked, in a low whisper, "Any sign?" Mr. Hisao shook his head and then answered, "Recent activity was spotted 2 cities over, but they seem to be slowing down. Guess they don't want to get too far out of their home turf, nor draw too much attention to themselves. So I'll let you two go on your own." Izuku nodded, as that would be for the best, as he was the only person Eri was comfortable around, and having someone follow them around would just scare her. Izuku then turned back to Eri. Would you like to go explore? Eri didn't give any answer but stayed by Izuku's side as he began to walk down the hallway. It was slow as Eri stopped at every strange noise, looking around, waiting for someone to jump out and attack them. Their first stop was the nurse's office, where Izuku dropped off Eri's old clothes. The nurse on duty looked up at the bag, and as confusion appeared on his face, Izuku said, "Do me a favor and burn the bag." Before the nurse could question his request, Izuku then walked away. The next stop on Izuku and Eri's little trip was the Sky Bridge, as Izuku knew Eri would want to see the outside world even if it was through a window. Unfortunately, it was on the 3rd floor, but luckily when Izuku called the elevator it was empty and directly took them to the 3rd floor. Stepping off the elevator, Izuku saw a sign that read Sky Bridge with an arrow pointing around the corner. Following the direction, they soon arrived at a small hallway that had a glass ceiling and exterior wall, with no rooms above or surrounding it. The glass walls provided a good view of the city line and the park that was directly across from the street. Izuku led Eri over to the glass wall and then sat down with Eri in his lap. She looked around at the world outside, the one she was used to. "Do you see the sky?" Izuku asked. Eri looked up and saw the light gray cloud littering the sky. White little snowflakes were starting to fall to the ground. "I remember it being blue," Eri said. "It's winter time when the sky gets cold and snow begins to fall," Izuku said, then realized something Maro had mentioned during one of the visits. That Izuku didn't have to worry about school because Christmas break was starting. Izuku laughed a little. He guessed saving Eri was a Christmas miracle for both of them, and that means today was Christmas Eve. So he quietly said to himself, "Merry Christmas Eve." Eri barely heard him and asked, "What's Christmas?" Izuku was able to keep his smile by telling him that Eri would be confused by Christmas even if she had lived a normal life. He looked at Eri and answered, "It's a holiday to celebrate and spend time with all members of your family. Would you like to spend Christmas with me and my mother?" Izuku asked as Eri stood up and looked out the window. She watched as the small snowflakes magically appeared in the sky and fell to the ground. It was the first time she had seen snow and she took everything in. The small sunlight coming through the clouds, glistening off the small flakes and the windows of the city. The dark shadows of the gray cloud that still held more light than the dark hallway of Shai Hasekia's bunker. Eri continued to look out the window for a while. The whole time Izuku didn't say anything. He allowed Eri to take everything in as he smiled. They stayed on the Sky Bridge, looking up at the sky until Eri's stomach began to growl. Izuku gave a small chuckle as he looked over and spotted a clock further down when the hallway turned back to normal. Using his enchanting eye vision, Izuku zoomed up on the clock and saw that it was nearly noon, meaning it was time for lunch. Izuku got onto his knee and then stood up, stretching his back slowly so as not to irritate his wounds. Eri noticed and looked away from the window and up at Izuku. "It's time for lunch." Izuku held out his hand and Eri slipped her fingers to interlock with Izuku's. They walked back to the elevator and headed up to the 2nd floor, which held the cafeteria. After walking out of the elevator and down the short hallway, Izuku held the door to the cafeteria. Luckily, it was mostly empty. Only a few nurses and doctors were in the room. While there were new people, they were spread out enough that Eri didn't feel overwhelmed. Yet the overall size of the room was scaring her too, as she had never seen a room so big. She held on tighter onto Izuku's hand, causing him to look down. "It's okay," Izuku said in his best reassuring voice that he could manage without knowing what was causing Eri to become scared. They continued into the cafeteria where Izuku grabbed a sandwich and a bottle of water for himself while grabbing a muffin and an apple for Eri. They walked over to a table, where Izuku had to use several plastic knives to cut the apple into slices and then the muffin into quarters. Once that was done, Izuku handed the food to Eri, who went straight for the apple and was a little hesitant about the muffin until Izuku wolfed down a quarter and smiled. Once they were done eating lunch, Izuku and Eri set about exploring a bit more of the hospital. They came across nurses and doctors who all smiled at Eri and then nodded to Izuku before continuing with their duty. After the 4 nurses, Izuku had begun to speculate that word about them had spread through the hospital. Speculation that was confirmed when a nurse outright thanked Izuku for his service and called him by name. Slightly weirded out by that, Izuku decided it was time to return to the room, where Eri promptly fell back asleep, as she had been tired and Izuku had to carry her through the last stretch. With nothing else to do, Izuku turned on the TV in the room, quickly turning the volume down to mute and then turned on the subtitles. He watched the news until he fell asleep in the chair. The next morning, Izuku woke up to a full bed of snow on the ground outside, as it had snowed heavily throughout the previous day and night. It looked like it was going to be a white Christmas after all. As he drew back from the window, a knock came from the door. Confused about who would be coming to see him early, as noticeable by the sun barely being in the sky, Izuku walked to the door. He looked out in the hallway and saw Inko and a doctor standing outside. "Hello, Mom, Doctor. Merry Christmas," Izuku said, flashing a smile. Merry Christmas, Izuku, Inko said, hugging her son. Despite how he had acted and portrayed himself to be, Inko could tell that her son was not getting the sleep he needed. Having to take care of Eri while recovering from his injuries, it was not going well physically for him. Doctor is here to do a final checkup. Inko finished by putting a fresh shirt on the bed for Izuku to wear. Final checkup? Izuku asked. He had only been in the hospital for a few days, and his bullet wound and broken ribs were going to take weeks to properly heal without any healing quirks. Dr. Asaz made note of your injuries, and they seem to be healing well. Nurses reported you and the girl were up and walking yesterday. Your injuries might not be fully healed, but they are to the point where you should be good to go home. And it's Christmas. No one should have to celebrate Christmas in the hospital. The doctor said. Izuku figured Dr. Asaz was the doctor he had met when he first arrived at the hospital. If you would take a seat, I can make sure everything is well on its way to healing. With the promise that he could go home, Izuku happily sat down in his chair. After pulling his shirt off, the doctor pulled back the wrap enough to check over Izuku's shoulder and chest. The skin around Izuku's ribs was tight and stiff, but the bruising started to go down. The same could not be said about Izuku's shoulder. The skin had turned red and black to a deep purple. It was healing, but still a long way from recovering. I suggest you don't lift anything heavier than 5 kilograms or you could reopen your wounds and take the chance of losing too much blood, the doctor said as he did so. Final review of the bullet wounds. As the doctor did so, Eri woke up and looked at Izuku. Lucky the doctor was standing in such a way that Eri was not able to fully see the wound. Izuku turned his head and looked at Eri. Good morning, Eri. It seems like we'll be able to go home today. Izuku then saw Eri curly up around her blanket. Izuku cursed himself. To Eri, home meant the Shy Hasekai hideout. My home, you don't have to worry about going back to that place ever again. Eri seemed to relax a bit while the doctor placed the medical wrap around Izuku's shoulder. While Izuku slipped his shirt back on, Izuku walked over to Eri and asked, Eri, would you like to try a cute little outfit I picked for you? Eri looked at Izuku, who gave a gesture for her to decide for herself. Eri looked at Inko and gave a small nod. Okay. Inko smiled brightly as she led Eri to the bathroom. However, before Eri walked in, she turned and looked at Izuku. Mero had mentioned that Eri would feel safe around Izuku, but the same might not happen for Inko. Izuku gave a small smile and said, I'll be right here if you need me. Okay, Eri said in a timid voice after a few seconds, then followed Inko into the bathroom. Once the door was closed, the doctor sighed and said, the medical staff were informed what you did for that little girl, saving her from the Yakuza. Dr. Asaz didn't give anything specific, but she must have had a horrible life if she didn't want to leave you. Best if most don't know about her past. I wish she could forget about it. It might help her live a normal life, Izuku said as the doctor finished wrapping Izuku's shoulder. Izuku rotated his shoulder and felt only a small flare of pain. In the medical field, doctors and nurses run into a lot of people with traumatic repressed memories. And while it might seem good to wish to forget those kinds of things, it's best to face them and grow. It can turn people into the best version of themselves. That's not to say you should force it. At her age, it would do more harm than good. So be there for her when she needs you the most, the doctor said, as he walked over to the counter and threw away his gloves. Trust me, I already planned to, Izuku said, as he stood up and grabbed his shirt from the bed. He slowly raised his arm and slid the shirt over his head. He then slid his arms through and out through the side and pulled the shirt down the rest of the way. He then walked over to the bathroom and gave a small knock. Everything going okay in there? We'll be out in a few seconds, Inko replied. Satisfied with that, Izuku walked back to his chair, as the doctor excused himself to continue making his rounds. Izuku only had to wait a few more seconds for the bathroom door to open. He walked as Eri walked out holding Inko's hand, which was a sight alone that made Izuku's heart warm up. Eri was trusting Inko enough to hold her hand, yet what nearly killed Izuku was what he noticed after he got past the hand holding. Eri was wearing a bright red skirt dress that went down to her knee. Underneath her overall straps was a long-sleeved white shirt, something Izuku didn't fail to notice as the dress and sleeve perfectly hid Eri's scars. Izuku smiled and knelt in front of Eri. You're so cute, Izuku said. Thanks, Eri said with little to no emotion in her voice. She was able to convey fear and panic, but it seemed she didn't understand how to convey positive emotions. A thought Izuku tried not to let show on his face. Are you ready to leave? Inko asked as Eri let go of her hand and grabbed her son. Eri looked up at Inko and gave a small nod. After quickly gathering all of Izuku's belongings and stuffing them into his backpack, the trio walked out of the recovery room, the agents watching them from afar. They walked to the parking garage, where Izuku had to sit in the back and have Eri sit on his lap. Inko made a mental note to herself that the next time she went shopping she needed to get a car seat for. As Inko drove the car out of the parking lot, Izuku looked back and asked, "What about my bike?" "Oh, Katsuki brought it home after he and Mitsuki visited," Inko said, turning onto the main road to head home. The sound of snow being crunched until the tires scared Eri, but then she found it relaxing. "But I still have the keys," Izuku said, reaching into his backpack then into his utility belt and pulling out his key that had an All Might keychain on it. "You don't think Katsuki doesn't know how to hotwire a car?" Inko said with a straight face as she looked at her son through the rearview mirror. Izuku was about to say that Bakugo would never know how to do that, but in all honesty that sounded like a random skill his best friend would have. Izuku started to think it was the truth, but then Inko began to laugh. He stopped by the house and asked for the spare key. Izuku chuckled at his mother's joke but didn't reveal his thoughts about it. He was seriously debating whether Bakugo had the skill to hotwire a vehicle. It wasn't a simple question Izuku could ask him without some questions being thrown back at him. As they continued away from the hospital, Eri was quiet. She looked out the window the entire time, watching small snowflakes fall to the ground. Then she looked at Izuku and began twirling her hair. Izuku noticed and laughed. "Yeah, your hair is white like the snow, shows how pure you are." "Pure?" Eri asked. "How much of a good person you are," Izuku said as Eri leaned to look out the window again. Eri was a pure and innocent soul and Izuku would fight anyone that dared to suggest otherwise. "But I'm not a good person. People died because of me," Eri said, a shadow coming over her eyes. She blamed herself for them because of what the man had told her, and when a person hears a lie enough times, they start to believe it. Izuku sighed as he looked at his mother from the rearview mirror. She had a knowing look and gave a small nod. Izuku got the message. "Eri, those people that were," Izuku couldn't bring himself to say killed. "Those people, they weren't your fault." "That man," Izuku didn't know if saying Chisaki's name would set Eri, so he decided to refer to him as Eri did. His decision led to that. "You had no part in that, because you're a good person." Izuku wrapped Eri in his arms and gave her a tight hug. Eri looked out the window for a bit more, then turned and looked at Izuku. "What about your hair? What does your hair mean?" Izuku would have laughed at the absurdity of the question, but he managed to stop himself. He quickly thought of an answer and said, "My hair shows I protect people. I can use it to save those around me." "How so?" Eri asked. "I'll show you," Izuku said, as he released Eri from her hug and raised his left hand up behind his ear. He made a show of twirling and weaving his hair until it solidified into the shape of a bullet. After Izuku put the bullet in Eri's hand, she intently looked over it, looking at the patterns made out of the green and purple of Izuku's hair. Later, Izuku would find it weird that Eri didn't ask what the bullet was or how it was used. The rest of the drive back to the Midoriya house was quiet. Once at the house, Eri took in all the Christmas lights that Izuku and Inko had put up at the beginning of the month. As it was still light outside, it was hard to see the lights, so Izuku made plans to bring Eri out once it got dark enough. After opening the garage door, Inko pulled the car into the garage and turned it off. Izuku carried Eri as he got out of the car and walked into the house. It seemed that with all of her free time, Inko had finished decorating the house. Garland was all over the walls and counters, as the Christmas village had been finished being set up on the mantle. A small fire within the fireplace warmed the house up. Izuku decided not to give a lecture on how it was dangerous to leave a fire unattended even if it was within the fireplace. Eri squirmed a bit, so Izuku put her down. She walked over to the Christmas tree that was in the corner. Izuku followed her and noticed that the number of presents had nearly doubled since he left the house 3 days ago. Izuku looked over at Inko as she walked into the house and pointed at the tree. "Oh, gifts from your father arrived yesterday, and some of the Marrow's employees sent a few gifts when they learned you were in the hospital," Inko said, putting her purse on the kitchen counter. "What are you and Eri in the mood for breakfast?" "I'll take some rice, and Eri like apples," Izuku said, walking towards the kitchen. He felt Eri's eyes on him, so he grabbed a chair from the table and sat in a spot where he could easily talk with Inko. But Eri could see him. "Dad sent that many gifts from America. Some of them are for the Bakugos," Inko pointed out as she grabbed an apple and began to cut it up. "By the way, they are going to be arriving after lunch to spend the afternoon and evening with us." "Okay," Izuku said, then heard Eri walking up to him. She was carrying a pillow from the couch, which made Izuku smile as she was hugging it tightly. "Are your friends coming?" Eri asked as she had heard the Bakugos being mentioned. Izuku nodded and said, "Yes, Kaken and his parents are coming over later." "Are you excited to see them again?" "Not the one who growled," Eri said, causing Inko to begin laughing. She began to question which one Eri could have referred to but decided it didn't matter as both options were extremely funny. As Inko continued to work on breakfast, Eri sat with Izuku watching Inko. Once breakfast was ready, Izuku helped Eri onto a chair and together the three of them enjoyed breakfast. Once the meal was finished, Izuku and Eri returned to the living room where Eri took a nap using Izuku's chest as a pillow. While Eri slept on Izuku, he powered on his PlayStation and played different games. As this went on, Inko went around making sure the house was clean enough for their guests. Once everything was to her standard, she walked into the living room and sat across from Izuku. She smiled as she looked at Eri. "She does seem to nap a lot. You should have seen how she looked in the hideout. I'm surprised she looks as healthy as she does now," Izuku said, as he paused his game and began to comb Eri's hair. It was still coarse and dry in Izuku's hand, but he didn't mind. The body is a natural healer, but the mind can take the most time. Spending time around you will help her mind recover and overcome the trauma she experienced. She may not be able to smile right now, but one day she'll light the world with it, Inko said. The rest of the morning was quiet, and once the Bakugos arrived, the house got a bit more lively. Throughout the different games played, everyone did their best to keep their voice at a normal level to help keep Eri calm. A few times Izuku had to hold Eri in a tight hug to keep her calm, but he didn't mind at all. After dinner, it was time to open presents. Izuku received mostly t-shirts, but from his father was a limited edition All Might statue that was only released in America, with a note asking for forgiveness as he couldn't be home for Christmas. Bakugo got a good laugh as Izuku intently inspected the gift, memorizing every detail of it. Slowly the evening went by, but eventually, the sun began to go down. Once it was dark enough, Izuku excused himself and Eri. After slipping into his shoes and a heavy jacket, Izuku wrapped Eri in a blanket and carried her outside. "Where are we going?" Eri asked as Izuku opened the front door. "I wanted to show you something. Can you close your eyes for me? It's a surprise," Izuku said. Eri closed her eyes and squeezed them shut. Izuku carefully walked down the snow-covered driveway and out into the street. Then he turned around. "Okay, you can open them," Izuku said. Eri opened her eyes and saw the bright Christmas light that decorated all the surrounding houses. Izuku saw a small smile appear on Eri's face. But it didn't last very long. "Eri, this is the world you get to live in now. You don't have to worry about being hurt ever again. I'll always be there to protect you." Eri turned around and hugged Izuku and in a small voice said, "Thank you." Izuku thought he had imagined Eri's words, but then her hug got tighter. The two of them stayed outside for a bit enjoying the Christmas light. But they had to head, and once Izuku noticed Eri's cheeks began to turn red from the cold. Izuku carried Eri in. She yawned and fell asleep in his arms. Izuku walked into the living room and nodded at everyone as they looked up at him. He walked up the stairs into his room. After skillfully opening the door, Izuku walked over to his bed and laid Eri down on it. There was enough room for Izuku to lay next to Eri, but he opted to walk over to his closest and pulled out a blanket. He walked over to his desk chair and got comfortable in it by laying it back. He could hear his mom talking with Bakugos, but soon his mind drifted off to sleep. Finally home from a stressful mission, but now he had UAS entrance exam to prepare for. The rest of the holiday break went smoothly. The day after Christmas, Izuku and Inko helped Eri open the last of her gifts she hadn't opened, and seeing how she had the largest pile and tired out early on, there was quite a bit to get through. Unsurprising, most of the presents were clothing, while a few were toys. Once all the presents were opened and the trash thrown away, Izuku taught Eri how to play in the snow. Eri used her new snow clothes that Inko purchased in tandem with the little dress she brought. Izuku taught Eri how to form a snowball in her hand and then how to roll it around in the snow to make it bigger. That resulted in what Izuku had planned out, as Eri helped push the gore-winged snowball around before starting on a second one to make a snowman. As they started the third snowball, Inko graciously provided the accessories. Izuku didn't find it so funny when Inko quickly slipped his All Might beanie onto the head of the snowman. To not sound harsh in front of Eri, Izuku seemingly stuck his tongue out at his mother, something that Inko returned and caused both of them to laugh. Through experiences such as that and others, Eri slowly began to open up to Inko. She still much preferred being around Izuku, but now he was able to leave the room to grab something without her worrying. However, when school hit, Izuku still had to stay at home as it seemed Eri had a sixth sense for whenever he left the house. The teachers and principal of Aldara questioned it, so Inko had to call in and a death in the family had happened and it was best that Izuku stayed home. With Izuku being a top student, the school fortunately didn't question it and allowed Bakugo to take more extra homework for Izuku, along with the understanding that Izuku would have to make up any test he missed when he got back. With that handled, Izuku spent the first 2 weeks of the new year allowing his body to heal. The day he could move around without too much pain, he dove back to training, lifting weights at the house and shadow sparring in his room. And when Bakugo was available, they spared to keep themselves from getting too rusty. As the while Eri would be sitting on the pushed-out-of-the-way couch, watching. She watched intently and had a hidden beam in her eyes every time Izuku won and looked like she wanted to punch Bakugo whenever he landed a hit. As though Izuku was still recovering, Bakugo didn't go easy. After 4 weeks of recovery, the day of the UA entrance exam finally arrived. Izuku woke on February 20th fully rested from the previous day. He woke up and slipped into a white t-shirt and a pair of dark green athletic pants with a matching jacket to help against the cold February weather. He quietly opened his door to the hallway, which he tiptoed down, all in an attempt to keep Eri asleep for as long as possible, hopefully long enough for him to leave. He crept down the stairs, dodging the squeaky step, and made it to the bottom floor. He exhaled, hoping that was going to be the most stressful part of his day, but was not willing to bet on it. He turned away from the steps and walked through the living room and into the kitchen, only to find that all of his effort was a waste. Not only were Inko and Eri awake, they were already enjoying breakfast. Izuku sighed in defeat as he quietly walked over to the table and sat down. Inko had a small smile on her face as she put a bowl of soup and grilled fish in front of him to eat, and Izuku humbly began to eat. "How long have you two been awake?" Izuku asked as he swooped up some soup in a spoon. "Barely half an hour. Eri said she wanted to help you on your big day," Inko said, using her spoon to point at Eri. "Well, thank you, Eri," Izuku said. Then the rest of breakfast was quiet as Izuku thought of the day ahead of him. Mero had called again last night asking if Izuku and Bakugo were sure they didn't want to take the recommendation test. Bakugo reaffirmed that they knew they could pass the recommendation test with flying colors. Taking the normal exam was more than a test to get in, as Bakugo had made a bet with Izuku. A bet Izuku accepted with a knowing shake to see who could earn the most points. Mero sighed at Bakugo's comment, and Izuku added they wanted to see how well they could do in the normal test. He pointed out that in the end, through the normal entrance exam, they would have a better chance to meet most of their classmates early on. Only 2 would be coming from recommendations for each class, and they want to get a sense of UAS baseline. The call ended after Mero gave another big sigh and called the 2 boys stubborn idiots, an insult that Izuku and Bakugo took with great pride, as they knew that better than anyone else. But now, after years of training and weeks of recovering, it was time to see how prepared they were to become pro heroes. Once Izuku was finished with breakfast, he grabbed his wallet and keys from the kitchen bowl and worked to head out. He was stopped as he put his shoes on. Eri came rushing over and gave Izuku a small hug. "You remember our promise? I'm going to be gone for a while. The first time you'll be without me for the day. Remember, everything is going to be okay and I'll be back for dinner. Are you ready for this?" Izuku asked. This day was just as important to him as it was to see how well Eri was doing. Even now, nearly 2 months later, Izuku could barely leave the house for 20 minutes before Eri called for him. Eri came a small nod while Inko walked over and hugged her son. "We'll be cheering for you. We've been working on showing our support." "Thank you, Eri," Izuku said, tightening the hug. "Good luck," Eri said, in the most confident voice Izuku had ever heard her speak in. It was still weak, but the best she had ever given, and that caused Izuku to start to feel his own heart beating. Now it felt like he could take on All Might and come out unharmed. Izuku wasn't crazy to think unscathed. No, maybe how much support he got from Eri. After a bit, Izuku realized something. He was still in the same spot after 5 minutes and the hug was still happening. So he said, I need to go if I'm going to make it on time." Inko and Eri held onto him for a few more seconds, then let go of him. As they pulled away, Izuku saw tears on the edge of Inko's eyes. "Mom, it's going to be okay. There is no way that I'm going to lose. It's just, I'm so happy to see you acting all grown up," Inko said. Izuku wasn't immature by no means. Inko wished Izuku acted his age a bit more, but ever since he had to start taking care of Eri, Inko just smiled, thinking maybe she didn't have to worry so much about the future and what could happen. Izuku looked Inko in the eyes and smiled. "Okay, you can go on." Izuku nodded as he stood up. He walked to the garage and got onto his bike. After backing it out to the garage and down the driveway, Izuku looked towards the front room window and saw Inko and Eri staring out at him. He waved as he slipped his helmet on. As soon as he had the strap tightened, Bakugo suddenly said, "Thank God. I thought I was going to $C King throw up if I had to watch any more of that." "Hey Kaken, I thought you didn't swear in front of Eri," Izuku said as he allowed his bike to roll into the street. Bakugo pulled up beside him in a similar outfit that was black instead of dark green. That little twerp can't hear me right now," Bakugo said, looking over at Izuku. They met eyes and laughed a bit, Izuku doing so as he found it hilarious that Bakugo wouldn't swear in front of Eri, even though he did with his own mother. Bakugo laughed nervously, really hoping Aunt Inko couldn't read his lips through the motorcycle helmet. "So you ready to ace this exam?" Izuku paused for a second, sitting up on his bike. He looked at Eri in the window and winked. 3, 2, 1, go. Izuku suddenly shifted his bike into first gear and shot off down the road. $C King cheat," Bakugo said in Izuku's ear and took off after him. They raced out of the neighborhood and through the streets of Musutafu. From their house, Uehai was visible, but they still had to weave their way through the downtown city streets to get the world's #1 hero school. As they raced down the streets, luckily hitting all greens, Bakugo slowly worked his way to catch back to Izuku, but he never had a chance as Izuku had always been a better driver, video game, or on their bikes. To keep his lead in the last stretch, Izuku twisted the throttle hard as he pulled his front wheel up. Now in a wheelie, Izuku began to pull ahead even more. Bakugo began yelling, but he couldn't catch up as Izuku passed in front of Uasuke. Izuku yelled excitedly, but then he heard a scream of panic. He looked forward and right in his path was a girl. Slamming on the brakes, Izuku went from riding on the back tire to balancing on the front tire. The tire squealed as it was forced to come to a sudden stop, and just in enough time. Izuku looked forward and saw that he was only a few inches from the girl. Before the weight of the motorcycle could crush the front axle, Izuku leaned back and the rest of the bike came to the ground. Izuku quickly put his feet on the ground to hold the bike steady and pulled off his helmet. Izuku looked at the girl, noticing she had brown bob-cut hair and pink cheeks, and she looked very angry. She was wearing a brown jacket and had a pink scarf around her neck. Izuku quickly flipped up the mouthguard of the helmet as he gave a small smile and said, "Sorry, got a little excited there. You almost hit me," the girl yelled, pulling her backpack around and hitting Izuku across the face, then using it to repeatedly hit him in the arm. Luckily, only a few people were around, one of whom was Bikago, who was laughing his head off. All right, I said I was sorry," Izuku said, raising his hand to defend from the backpack and the girl using it to attack. "I should have paid better attention to where I was driving." "Yes, you should have," the girl said, attacking Izuku one last time and then slipping her backpack over her shoulder. Izuku watched as the girl walked through the gate, then looked over at Bakugo, who was still laughing his head off. "Come, let's just park our bikes and get in. The ceremony should be starting soon," Izuku said in an embarrassed tone. He slipped off his bike and they walked over to a parking lot that was across from UA. In sync, they dropped their kickstand and slid their helmets over the handles. They turned and walked across the street. As they walked through the front gate, an announcement that the UA entrance exam ceremony would begin soon. Izuku and Bakugo quickly picked up their pace, got their exam numbers, and managed to get to their seats right as the light turned off. "Can I get a hell yeah?" Present Mike called out as he walked onto the stage. As usual, he wanted to get a resounding response but wasn't expecting the same. However, when two voices yelled out in response, loud enough to sound like a group of 20, Present Mike got a small smile. He scanned the crowd and came across an ash blonde with spiky hair and a purple and green ponytail. The purple and green ponytail even had their hands up to their mouth to make themselves louder. "Thank you to those two listeners. Now welcome to UAS entrance exam. This exam will assist in two parts. A written portion where you will have to answer 100 questions within an hour and a half. At the end of the allotted time, you must return the worksheet, and then we will move on to the physical portion of the test. The worksheet will now be handed out." While everyone waited for someone to start handing out worksheets, only Bakugo and Izuku looked down at their armrest to see a worksheet and pencil sliding out. As Izuku and Bakugo grabbed the page, more and more people noticed themselves and grabbed their copy. Once everyone had their worksheet, Present Mike said, "Begin." A large countdown appeared on the screen behind Present Mike and everyone tore into their worksheet. Izuku looked down at the first question and was surprised by the level of education it was. UA was known as a high school, but the question was almost college level in complexity. Yet Izuku only had to read over it twice to fully understand and solve the question. He stole a glance over to Bakugo and saw that he was already on the third question, and with time still counting down, Izuku moved to the next question. As the hour and a half was counted down, Izuku could hear people mumbling under their breath and writing down their answers. Izuku worked not to become distracted as he worked on his own questions. At the hour mark, Present Mike announced that to signal that they were down, the examinees simply had to return the worksheet back to the slit it had first arrived in. With only 3 questions to go and after a quick review of the question he was more uncertain of, Izuku returned his worksheet to the slit. It quickly took the page back like a DVD sliding to a player. Izuku then looked over and saw Bakugo returning his worksheet. Once the countdown reached 0, an air horn was blown and Present Mike announced that anyone who was caught still answering questions would forfeit their enrollment and be asked to leave in a form of public humiliation that Present Mike had control over. After a few moments, Present Mike received a notification that all worksheets had been returned and he could move on to the physical portion of the exam. Alright, it's time to move on to the physical portion of the entrance exam. For this test, each of you will be given a card with the location of where you will be taking the exam. Once all participants have arrived, the exam will begin, which will consist of you fighting 4 types of robots. As Present Mike spoke, the screen behind him showed the silhouette of 4 robots. Each robot will be worth a different number of points, and with increasing points, so do the challenge of defeating them. You have the 1-point robots. They are fast but the easiest to destroy, a good way to earn points by attacking several all at the same time. The silhouette of the 1-point robot turned on and showed that it had little armor. You can think of these like Goombas from Nintendo. There's a lot, but they're easy to handle. Next, you have the 2-point robots. They are still pretty fast but have much stronger armor. You'll have to be precise with your attack to damage them. The silhouette of the 2-point robot appeared and it showed that while it had a similar build to the 1-pointer, it had more armor over its body. Think of Koopa, like harder, but the same strategies work. Then you have the 3-point robots. These are much slower but are built to withstand your strongest attack. You'll have to be smart when you deal with them. They're the chain chomps of the exams. Now you'll be receiving your location cards. A slot opened on Izuku's armrest and he pulled it out. He was placed in exam area D, which Izuku showed to Bikago. Bakugo laughed as he showed he had exam area A. Izuku shook his head as Bakugo had to make the dumbest things a competition. Yet Izuku laughed alongside his best friend. Excuse me, Present Mike sir. You said there were 4 robots, but you've only mentioned 3. I don't believe a school such as UA would miss such an oversight. An examinee with short blue hair and a stiff posture stood up. Aw nice, examinee number 1587. We like to leave this robot unknown as a surprise, but I'll explain it to help with the confusion. The last robot is known as the 0-point robots, and there is only one pre-exam area. It not worthy of any points as it's nigh impossible to destroy. Kind of a test within itself, like thumps. If nothing else, it's a good way to show off your strength. But be warned, it built to withstand a level of strength. So if you struggle with any other robot, I do not suggest trying to attack it. Present Mike said. Oh, thank you, sir. Examinee number 1587 said, then said down. Happy to help a little listener. With that, please exit this room and find the bus that had your exam letter on it. Present Mike said, then walked off stage. Izuku walked with the crowd of examinees until he was outside. He quickly spotted a bus with a massive D on the side of it. After saying bye to Bikago, Izuku walked over to the bus and got on. He sat towards the back and closed his eyes, some stress appearing in his mind. So he began to repeat the phrase his mother had taught him. Emotion starts in the heart, the core of a person's soul. It flowed through the lungs and swells with power. Then it flows through veins and moves the body. It goes from a person's feet to the end of the hand. He repeated the phrase in his mind until he felt the bus begin to slow down and then shortly after come to a complete stop. He opened his eyes and saw a lot of examinee rushing to get off the bus into the fake city that was their exam area. As he looked over everyone, he saw a recently familiar hairstyle. It was the girl he had almost run over. Though he had already apologized, he still wanted to say sorry again. Izuku was one of the last few people who filed off the bus. Once off, Izuku scanned the growing crowd for the girl. It took a few passes, but eventually he was about to spot her sitting under a tree. She appeared to be meditating, as she was sitting cross-legged and her arms resting in her lap. At least that's what it looked like, as she did not seem calm at all. Izuku silently walked over and leaned against the tree. You know, it's better to sit in the sun when you're meditating. The warmth helps relax your body. That way your body doesn't have to work so hard to keep warm, especially in this kind of weather, Izuku said as he looked up at the semi-clear sky with the sun coming down and warming the midwinter spring air. The girl opened an eye and looked up at Izuku, then she closed her eyes. She must have suddenly recognized Izuku as her eyes shot back open. What are you doing here? I'm taking the entrance exam. As for talking to you, just want to give some words of advice and to say sorry again, Izuku said. Shouldn't that have been obvious? Second and third years had the day off, while all teachers would be somewhere to watch the exam. Who else would he possibly be? The girl stood up as a confused look appeared on her face. You're taking the entrance exam? But you were riding a motorcycle. Don't you at least have to be 16 to have a license, making you a second year? Izuku smiled as he hadn't thought about it like that. Guessed he was just used to having a bike that he had momentarily forgotten it was a special treatment. Oh, yeah, that's understandable. I have a few connections in Kaken and I were able to get our licenses for our 15th birthday, Izuku said, pushing off from the tree and walking around to look straight at the girl. Kaken, the girl said, tilting her head. She had never heard a name like that before. Katsuki Bakugo. He was the guy laughing at me, riding the other motorcycle. Sorry, I never introduced myself. Izuku Midoriya, Izuku said, holding out a hand. Achako Uraraka. Achako introduced herself but didn't shake Izuku's hand. Nice to meet you, Izuku said, withdrawing his arm and folding it across his chest. He found it odd that Achako didn't return the greeting. Maybe she was still mad about him nearly running her over. So who do you know that lets you get a motorcycle license? Achako asked. That was an innocent question enough. One of my mother's old colleagues, Izuku said, and then the starting gun went off. Without excusing himself, Izuku's instinct kicked in and he took off towards the opening door. As he slipped through the crowd and into the fake city, he heard others yell, "What about a countdown?" That must have been an expected question as the intercom turned on and Present Mike said, "There is no countdown in real life. You better hurry as 2 of you already have points." Izuku looked around and noticed cameras over the fake city. He looked up and watched as 1 pointer and 2 pointer fell over, a small hole through both of their heads. Izuku allowed his arm to transform back as he looked at his left bicep, staring down at his tattoo. The same tattoo that Bakugo was the first to point out, and after some investigation it had turned out it was an ammo counter, so Izuku could tell when he got low on ammo and needed to make more. The tattoo was made of tiny bullet shapes, each of them color coordinated, and when Izuku hit his max of 300 bullets it would wrap around his upper arm like a tribunal tattoo. As Izuku began running towards a building, he counted 50 bullets in total. He had been to project velocities range to keep his skills sharp but was now cursing himself for not having taken the time to restock his ammo. Izuku planned that the second he had a chance to breathe he would restock his ammo, but first, he had to get to a vantage point. Izuku ran inside the building and directed himself to the stairs. Not even bothering with the elevator, Izuku began to quickly climb the stairs of the 10-story building. Within 2 minutes, Izuku got to the top and shot the lock off the door. Kicking the door open, Izuku rushed out onto the roof. He slowed down to catch his breath as he neared the edge of the building. Looking down, he saw the chaos that was UAS entrance exam. People were running around using their quirks to destroy the robots. Some were easily winning against the 1- and 2-point robots, while some were having to team together. Yet in the chaos, Izuku didn't notice a single person easily handling the 3-point robots. Izuku sighed as he transformed his right arm and took up position, resting his barrel on the rake of the building. Izuku knelt down and then quickly began to pick off robots. Some were nowhere near people, others Izuku got to mere seconds before someone else. He was gaining points quickly and soon lost count, focusing soloing on taking shots. It didn't take long for Izuku to run out of bullets, a clicking sound coming from his arm when that happened. So Izuku quickly raised his left hand into his hair and began weaving bullets. A skill he had gotten so good at that he was able to weave 3 bullets at the same time. The moment they solidified, Izuku slipped them into his right arm and began firing again. Since he was able to weave bullets at such a high amount, even with him taking shots when he could, he was slowly restocking his ammo. Izuku looked over the city, seeing the different examinees fending for their lives, when he came across something that caught his attention. He came across an examinee who was by himself and was struggling to dodge an attack from a group of 6 1-pointers. The purple-haired examinee narrowly dodged an attack but was then knocked to the ground by a different attack. Izuku instantly focused on the 1-pointer that was able to launch a third attack and didn't hesitate to fire a shot. Hitoshi Shinsu hates everything about the physical portion of the exam. It clearly catered to the more straightforwards and destructive quirks, leaving no room for quirks like his that only worked on living things. Yet he still applied for it, having a backup plan of generals, and after managing to finish the stressful written portion, he was now faced with the robots. Once the exam had begun, Shinsu immediately distanced himself from others to work on his plan, to show that even without extra strength, he could show he was able to handle himself and be noticed. Shinsu's reflexes were above par. Teaching himself how to read body language gave him an unexpected advantage, and he had been able to stay untouched for a bit. Yet it didn't do him much good when it mattered. When the physical exam had begun, Shinsu had gained a quick 2 points using some debris to destroy 2 1-pointers. Yet as more and more people filed into the fake city, he knew if he didn't distance himself, others would steal his kills, nor would it help his plan to be noticed. And that's what led him to his current situation. A group of 6 1-pointers had boxed him in with attacks coming from all sides, was making it hard to stay untouched. So when the first attack managed to hit him, Shinsu fell to the ground. He was ready for more attacks to come, but then he heard the sound of metal being broken. He looked up and saw that one of the 1-pointers had its fist a mere centimeter away from his face. Shinsu followed the arm up to the robot's head and first noticed that its glowing red eye wasn't just no longer glowing. It wasn't there anymore. In its place was a bullet hole that went through to the back of its head. The 1-point robot shook a bit before falling face first into the ground. Shinsu to roll to the side so as not to be crushed by the fist. As the other 1-pointer looked at their fallen comrade, analyzing to see what had happened, something hit the ground next to Shinsu's hand. Shinsu looked at it and saw that it was purple and green. Was it bullet-shaped? And was that a speaker on the butt end? "Forgive me for stealing your kill, but it looked like you needed some help." A voice came through the bullet as if it was a walkie-talkie. This made it so Shinsu was no longer the only one looking at the bullet-shaped object, as all the 1-pointers narrowed on it, as if they were trying to figure out what it was and where it had come from. "I don't need any help from you. I can do this on my own," Shinsu said. He had trained and prepared for this, trying not to let any of his old classmates decide his future for him. He was going to become a hero. "Understandable. Then I'll watch as you handle the other 1-pointers," the voice said, calmly, as if the owner of it was going to relax and sit back in a lawn chair. Shinsu waited for a snarky remark or for his helper to go against his word and destroy the 5 1-pointers. Yet nothing happened. "I'm waiting," the voice said, as if judging Shinsu's actions. Shinsu didn't say anything and the 1-pointers didn't move. Are you not attacking, as perhaps your quirk is not oriented towards combats?" the voice said. "I've noticed many others struggling in similar situations, as their quirks are not suited for situations such as this, or they're not strong enough. Usually, it would make sense to do so. They team up with others and work with others. Yet you haven't. Why?" Shinsu's pride flared up a bit at that. Is that what a hero was, or the only kind of people that could be heroes? Ones that could throw stronger punches and cause physical damage? You mean those that aren't suited to be heroes? I didn't say that. A hero can come from any quirks, despite what the media has others to prove. Clearly you believe the same, otherwise you won't be here or trying to prove everyone wrong. The voice said, as if reading Shinsu's thoughts. Well, there are some quirks that are flashy and more straightforward. Every quirk has its uses. You just have to wait for the time to show them. Shinsu just looked at the bullet, confused as it seemed the person speaking through it was peering into his mind, seeing all those who had called his quirk villainous and never meant to be a hero. However, you won't get the chance to do so if you don't earn some points. The voice pointed out. If Shinsu didn't get in now, it would be an uphill battle, even harder than before to get transferred to the hero course. Yet, I don't need you help, Shinsu reiterated. Okay, then how about some advice? There's a small switch on the back of all the robots' heads, the voice said in a more casual tone. Shinsu had to suddenly roll as the one-pointers began to attack again. However, instead of fully dodging, Shinsu dodged just enough to give him space to get back on his feet. Shinsu then raced up the robot's arm and jumped over its head. Wait, why was Shinsu believing this random stranger? Was it because he had taken time to already help Shinsu? No, there were other reasons, the main being deep down Shinsu knew this might likely be his best chance of earning points. Shinsu jumped over the head of the one-pointer and flipped onto it back. He looked at the neck and didn't see a switch, just a small hatch. A hatch made sense. If the off switch was out in the open, everyone would just switch from destroying the robots to turning them off. Hanging on tight, Shinsu grabbed the hatch and pulled it open. Inside was a red switch that Shinsu flicked off. The one-pointer powered down then slumped forward, as Shinsu rode on it back. He couldn't believe it. There was a switch and it actually worked. He might actually be about to earn points to be noticed. Shinsu turned and looked at the remaining one-pointers. Now that he knew their secret, he had a plan for how to win. As the practical portion of the entrance exam was occurring, the staff of UA that oversaw first-year students were all sitting in an observation booth, with monitors all over the walls watching to see the potential of their potential student. It seems we have quite the batch of people this year. In the past, the points have been more spread out, but this year they are more separated. Principal Nezu said as he and the other first-year teacher looked over the different exam areas. Many robots had been destroyed, yet it was nowhere close to the number UA had at its disposal. Yes, only a batch of them are gaining points quickly, Vlad King said as he looked at a red-haired kid taking a hit from a 2-point, only to return the favor and easily destroy the robot. Yes, but each goes about it their own way. Some through brute force, Ms. Midnight said, gesturing to a screen that Vald King was looking at. Some have more finesse to their actions. She gestured to a screen that showed Bakugo skillfully jumping up the arms of the robot before blasting the heads with his quirk, so require only a bit more help. This time the monitor showed Ochako taking away the gravity of several robots before crushing them to the floor. Some only require a new method of action. Shinasu was seen jumping on the back of a 2-pointer and flipped the switch on the back of its head. That purple-haired kid, how did he learn about the switches? They're well hidden and that students aren't informed about beforehand, Powerloader said as he was the one who designed the robots. While he could have left the switch inaccessible, Principal Nezu asked to be accessible for the more observative examinee. Yet in the years since Powerloader became a teacher at UA, no one had ever gone for the switches. Area D, do we have any cameras on the main central building? Eraserhead asked, having only paid attention to a specific monitor for a while. He was seeing a weird sight that he wanted to have a close look at. This confused his fellow teachers as they had never known him to show interest in a particular examinee. Principal Nezu tapped a few keys and the main screen switched to the roof camera. It showed Izuku kneeling at the edge of the building with his arms slowly moving away following different robots. As he looked through his scope, oh hey, that's one of the little listeners that responded to my introduction. Can I give him some bonus points in the form of rescue points? Present Mike said. Mike, your introduction doesn't matter right now. Look at the kid's arm, Eraserhead said as all of the teachers focused on Izuku's arm. He fired off some bullets before leaning back from his scope to look for more robots to handle his arms, it looks like. Lady Nagant, Principal Nezu said, being the first one to say the name of the traitorous hero in 9 years. And with the name being said, it felt like the room fell a few degrees in temperature, as if stating her name, being her presence was enough to do so. All the teachers remembered the day her name flashed across Japan's media and news outlets. A pro-hero turned villain. It took the HPSC and other pro-heroes months to rebuild the trust that Lady Nagant had fractured. Wasn't that hero that was arrested after killing 2 heroes? She was sent to Tartarus, wasn't she? Present Mike said. Not believe that a kid as good as Izuku could be related to Lady Nagant. He had responded to Present Mike's introduction, the first ever, and that had made the loud blonde's day. Yeah, I never knew she had a kid, Snipe said. Examine number 15427. Izuku Midoriya. Quirk, arm launcher. Principal Nezu said as Izuku exam information and quirk file appeared on a side screen. Born to Hisashi and Inko Midoriya. Father was a contract worker for a security company but was then promoted to foreign affairs. Mother is a stay-at-home mom. And there's more, he has a police record. What trouble has he gotten into so far? Eraserhead asked. While a police record wasn't an immediate expulsion, it depended on what was on the record. Principal Nezu tapped a few more keys and a mugshot of Izuku was shown. Not a good start, but then Midnight pointed out, he's smiling. I thought you weren't allowed to smile for your mugshot. Staring back at the teacher was a photo of Izuku Midoriya, who looked like he was having the best time of his life, unusually for someone to be showing when getting their mugshot. And look, there's no nameplate or ID number, it's just a photo. Cementos pointed out the oddity. As usual, a mugshot had the person's name, their state ID number, and then a code of what they had been arrested for. Let's have a look at the arrests, Snipe said. If Izuku's mugshot was unusual, then perhaps his arrests held the answers. Principal Nezu pulled up the files of arrests. But to the surprise of the teacher, all had been pardoned. Strange, Izuku Midoriya's files had him arrested for assault with quirk, illegal quirk usage. Look at the illegal quirk usage. There's only one of those and it's early on, Present Mike said, drawing everyone's attention to one of the first few files. Principal Nezu selects the only illegal quirk usage arrest file and all the teachers read over the account. What is a bodyguard license? 13 asked, and it seemed none of the teachers were familiar with it either. It's similar to a hero license. It allows the owner to use their quirk within a dangerous situation to either protect themselves or someone else, usually a political figure or CEOs. All Might said, speaking up for the first time, as he had sent his focus on watching his successor. You are correct, All Might. However, as the test is extremely demanding physically and mentally, most go for a hero license as it allows for free usage of their quirks. However, I had not heard of someone so young having such a license, Principal Nezu said, reading the line of Izuku receiving his license at the age of 13. That doesn't explain why all of the arrests were pardons. Even with jail time or community service, he won't have the time to make up for everything, Present Mike said. As Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo were not the instigators of the fight, and were merely using their quirks and talents to protect others, the motion of pardon is accepted. Eraserhead said, reading the last section of the report. Why kind of police station pardons a pair of teenagers for something like that? Principal Nezu looked up from his tablet where he had read the other arrest reports, a station who has run with said teenagers multiple times. In each of the reports, it states that Midoriya and Bakugo were doing civil duties to protect others. Some go as far to point that the people they assault were assaulting others, and that the two of them only went so far to dissuade the other person from fighting back. Sounds like those two know how to get around the law, Snipe said, as that could be dangerous for heroes in training. If they knew how to get around the law, they could eventually stop disciplining themselves, and one day they could go too far. True. Further, each report is signed by Officer Nico of the Mufasta General Police Department. Someone is keeping an eye out for those two, Principal Nezu said. Are we going to expel them? Midnight asked. They had run into trouble case students before, all with different sorts of problems, ranging from no control over their quirk to horrible personality. Yet UA had never seen a pair of potential students with a rap sheet like this. Normally just one of these arrests would be grounds to do so, but it seems that each time circumstances were in favor of letting the boys go. If the local police see it fit not to hold anything against them, I don't see why we can't do the same, Principal Nezu said. This is one of your philosophical reasons that you won't explain, Eraserhead said, making it not sound like a question at all. Yes, and it perfectly goes along with a question I have asked all over you, Principal Nezu said, but then his aura went a little dark. Yet I believe it would be best to keep a close eye on Midoriya and Bakugo. Now, Principal Nezu swiped on his tablet and a redacted file appeared on the main monitor. I found this from the Hero Public Safety Commission, and as you can see it's heavily redacted. By who? Midnight asked. One Fumiko Mero. Vlad King reading the signature on the redacted file. Look at the heading, Project Velocity. Think the kids have had some early training. From his position, he certainly knows how to utilize his quirk. He went for a high vantage point, allowing him to see the entire battlefield and pick up any target he wanted to. Snipe said, as he had done something similar during his entrance exam. Yet he still moved around to keep robots within his range. And the other one, Bakugo. He has excellent control over his quirk, using it to get in close, destroy the robots, and then move on. He is not wasting his quirk on second guessing or wasted movement. He's confident in himself and his skills. Principal Nezu, can we open a comm around Midoriya? Looks like he is talking to someone. He got some kind of earpiece, Eraserhead said, as he noticed something sticking out of Izuku's ear. Principal Nezu nodded as he typed a few keys. As the camera on Izuku reappeared on the main monitor, a small buzz came through, and then Izuku's voice came through. Shinso, you've got another group of 4 one-pointers coming on your right in 2 blocks. No one is around. Easy pickings. On it. Shinso's voice came through. Principal Nezu looked up Shinso's examination number and revealed he was the examinee who knew about the off switch. Uraraka, you got a duo of 3-pointers 100 yards south of your position. Got a girl with vines for hair struggling to keep them at bay. Think you can help her out? Izuku asked, as he took a shot and pierced the head of a 3-pointer robot. The head suddenly glowed red and then melted, causing the robot to fall over. I'm now on my way. Which way is south? Ochako asked. You're 9 o'clock, Izuku said. Principal Nezu pulled up Ochako's file and switched a screen to her. The teachers looked between the three of them and how Izuku was feeding them information. It seemed like they were moving like a well-oiled machine, as if they had trained together. Yet, I thought friends and classmates were supposed to separate for the exam. Present Mike said, the others nodding in agreement. Principal Nezu scanned the files of the three and stated, nothing in their files suggests they met each other before today. Midoriya is local while Shinsu and Uraraka are from out of town. So obviously the Midoriya boy has training if he's able to effectively lead two people he's never met before through the exam while keeping points for himself. It seems he's keeping the northwest section of Area D for himself, while giving Shinsu control of the east and while Ochako has the south. Quite the leader, Vlad King pointed out. Impressive indeed. But I would like to come back to young Midoriya's connection to Lady Nagant. She was a top hero and could make the billboard if her public opinion was more friendly in her later years as a hero. All Might said, bringing the conversation back to the point that had caught their interest in the first place. Yes, there is still much that clouds the truth of that day. Principal Nezu said, you read the story, she killed two up-and-coming pro-heroes. Gunshots to the head, purple and pink bullets found around the scene. Midnight stated, a story likely created by someone within the media. Eraserhead voiced his opinion. He never held the media highly, so no matter how true or honest the stories seemed, Eraserhead never fully believed them. In fact, the more truthful and honest the story seemed, the less Eraserhead believed it. Then there is this Project Velocity, led by this Fumiko Mero. I for one have never heard of such a program. While it doesn't sound villainous, I am still curious about what part it plays in all this. All Might said, are you suggesting Midoriya might be a villain like Lady Nagant, sent to infiltrate UA? Are you saying we shouldn't allow him to enroll? Snipe suggested, nothing that black and white, but I am suggesting we keep an eye on young Midoriya. A close one at that, while we work to figure out how everything fits in the puzzle. Not to find out if young Midoriya is a villain or what his exact connection to Lady Nagant is, but to better understand where one of the next top heroes is coming from. All Might said, you believe that kid can be the next #1 hero? Eraserhead said. All Might nodded. If he turns out to be an honest kid, then yes. I mean, if you count the points he's given to young Shinso and young Uraraka, he is well on his way to placing a third top score, right behind Endeavor and myself. All the teachers looked at the Izuku score, now at 96, and still increasing, while the points Ochako and Shinso had were a collective 84. Even if Ochako and Shinsu earned some points for themselves, Izuku's collective score could be at least 160. Endeavor's score was 218 while All Might's was 287. They watched Izuku take a few shots, each one increasing Izuku's score. In 9 minutes Izuku had gotten his score up to 125, the whole time giving callouts to Ochako and Shinsu. It didn't seem he was slowing down either. While UA didn't suspect having to use many robots during the entrance exam, there was a nigh unlimited amount of them. And with every robot Izuku shot and killed, another was released in Exam Area D, meaning Izuku wouldn't have to slow down. All Might, how about we test your theory of young Midoriya? Powerloader, I believe it's time to send in the 0 pointers, Principal Nezu said. Powerloader nodded, then leaned forward and pressed a red-lit button. Izuku shot his last bullet and heard a clicking noise as he tried to fire another one. Izuku cursed himself as he had lost count of his bullets. Izuku quickly raised his left hand to his hair and began to weave more bullets. As any support equipment was not allowed in the exam, Izuku didn't have any of his hair dyed, so he was stuck with normal bullets. As Izuku worked to reload, he felt the ground begin to rumble. He inserted the bullet in his arm, then heard Ochako ask, anyone else feeling that? Yeah, is it someone's quirk? Like a last-ditch attempt to get points, Shinsu suggested. No, it's the 0 pointer. I haven't seen any robot that looks like the 0 pointer. It must be like a final gauntlet kind of thing. Present Mike did say it was a good way to show off our quirks, Izuku said. He looked over the city and he could see smoke coming from the south. Uraraka, it looks like it is coming from your part of town. Izuku waited for Ochako to respond, but she didn't. Uraraka, are you there? There was some static. The Ochako's voice came through faintly, as if the bullet from far from her. I'm stuck. A piece of rubble fell and pinned my leg. I can't pull my leg out and I can't reach it with my hand and use my quirk. Izuku jumped up and looked at where the smoke was coming from. Now he could see the 0 pointer with his naked eye, and he could see the wave of examinees running from it. Going down the stairs will be too slow. He won't be able to get to Ochako in enough time. Izuku stood up on the edge and looked down. He was 10 floors up and had no sensible quick way to get down. Though he had one trick, the timing was hard and it took more than just one bullet to achieve. It was the only way he would survive a 10-floor drop, and it was going to hurt. Izuku looked back at the group of examinees running from the 0 pointer. They were in trouble and needed help. Screw it, Izuku said, and with a deep breath took a step forward. He felt gravity take effect. and his hair was whipped back as he fell. As he fell, Izuku aimed his right arm down, bracing his shoulder with his left hand. And as he passed the 6th floor, he released a shot that sounded like a cannon. Again at the 4th floor, then the 2nd, then one last time as he reached the 1st floor. As Izuku hit the ground, he had to roll to keep his legs from getting injured, but he made it down without too much damage, though his right shoulder was starting to hurt. If he hadn't braced it with his left, it would have most likely become dislocated, pushing the pain to the back of his head. Izuku got to his feet and headed towards the natural beacon his calm bullet he had given to Ochako was giving him. As he ran down the street, he had to push through hordes of people, all of them yelling to run in the opposite direction. He could feel himself getting closer to the bullet, so he continued to run until he saw Ochako stuck under some debris. Izuku slid like a baseball player, stopping right next to Ochako. He looked over the piece of rubble. It appeared to be from a wall and had rebar sticking out of it at out angles. She looked at Izuku and grimaced. "My leg, it's pinned. Is it broken?" Izuku asked as he tried to lift the rubble off Ochako's legs, but it was too heavy. If Ochako's leg was broken, then Izuku would have to switch tactics, as trying to lift it would just irritate the break even more. "I can't tell. The feeling from my leg disappeared as soon as it got pinned," Ochako said. She saw Izuku transform his arm and stick it underneath and try to use it as leverage, but the rock barely moved. "Do you have any more special bullets like the one you gave me?" "None that would be useful. I would need hair dye," Izuku said as he shifted to try and push the debris off of Ochako, but that worked even less than his previous attempts. But he wasn't deterred, so he kept on trying to remove the rubble from Ochako's leg, until he felt the sun get blocked from view. Ochako noticed it too and both looked up, only to see the zero-pointed robots looking down at them. Its glowing eyes stared as it peered into their soul, judging them. Izuku chuckled nervously while Ochako yelled and began fanatically to get out of the rubble. On instinct, Izuku aimed his right hand up and fired a shot, yet all he could hear was the bullet bouncing off the outer metal shell of the zero-point robot. There was no way he was penetrating that armor. Even if he did a higher pressurized shot, it would most likely dislocate his shoulder. And there was no guarantee that would stop the robot, and then they would seriously be in trouble. Then again, this was a test. There was no serious way UA would let people get killed, would they? Yet UA as a school was known for their extreme methods, and accidents could be handled at any turn. Izuku looked up at the zero-pointer, its hand beginning to close to grab Izuku and Ochako. As logic and reason left Izuku's mind, he immediately raised his right arm again and felt the pressure begin to build up in his arm. He held it until he couldn't withstand it anymore. With a yell, he released a shot that shattered the nearby glass. Izuku was forced to the ground from the shot, his legs buckling and causing his head to hit the ground. He looked up through fuzzy eyes as his bullet went screaming through the air and knocking the head of the zero-pointer clean off its shoulders. Pressure from the bullet was enough to hit the chin of the zero-pointer and cave in immediately, only to be followed by the entire head nearly being knocked clean off. Izuku clenched his teeth, nearly breaking them, as pain shot through his right shoulder and then down his entire arm. He barely made out the bell going off, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku fought through the pain and sat up. He watched as 2 medical droids arrived and lifted the rubble off of Ochako's leg. She crawled over and Izuku helped to sit up. "Nice to see you again. I'm Izuku Midoriya," Izuku said as he held his left hand onto his right shoulder. It wasn't fully dislocated, but ligaments were screaming in pain. He would need to put an ice pack on when he got home. "Ochako Uraraka, thanks for all your help. You directed me perfectly to robot groups I could handle." "Why?" Ochako asked as she leaned against a small piece of debris. She looked up to the sky as she caught her breath. "I lost count of my points, figured I had enough. I wanted to make up for nearly running you over, so I helped you out a bit. Though your points were earned by you, I just told you where you could find them." Izuku said. "About Shinzu. Why help him?" Ochako asked, as she lazily turned her head to look at Izuku. "Don't know." I could see how disappointed he was. It was clear that his quirk wasn't suited for a test like this, but I could see how much he wanted to be a hero. So I told him about the power switches on the back of the robots. "Same as you though. He had to work to flip those switches," Izuku said, and he wanted to see what kind of hero Shinzu would become. "Well, aren't you two a cute couple?" a voice said. Izuku freaked out and began looking around. His eyes fell on Recovery Girl, and he became so excited in meeting her he could completely forget what she had just said. "We're not a couple, we just met today," Ochako mumbled. Recovery Girl just smiled as she knelt next to Ochako. She slowly rolled Ochako's tattered pant leg up and looked it over. It was a bright red and was slowly turning purple. "Well, it's not broken, just sprained and you got a nasty bruise. One kiss should be good enough," Recovery Girl said as she sent down her cane on the floor. "Kiss?" Ochako asked, then was suddenly kissed by a large pair of lips. She felt her leg heal but then felt a wave of exhaustion come over her. It felt as if she had just run a marathon and her body was running out of adrenaline. She looked down and saw the bruise on her leg quickly disappeared. Recovery girl. Her quirk allows her to kiss someone and accelerate their natural healing process, Izuku said as he moved his right shoulder a bit. The smallest movement sent flares of pain through his body. Now for you, dear. I saw how you got down that building. Your arm must be in great pain, Recovery girl said, as she walked over and moved the remains of Izuku's jacket and shirt out of the way. His arm was raw red and there was a shallow cut that went down the back of his tricep. Blood was slowly moving down the back of his arm. Not the dumbest way I've used my quirk, Izuku said. Recovery girl gave Izuku a kiss and his body relaxed, though he didn't appear as exhausted as Ochako. Recovery girl then helped both to their feet and bid them a good afternoon. Ochako took a few steps but was too exhausted to continue walking. Izuku came to the rescue, looped one of her arms over his shoulder and helped her walk. As they walked, Ochako asked the question, "So are you from around here?" "Yeah, I live in Musutafu. What about you?" Izuku asked as they walked around a destroyed two-pointer with its chest caved in. "Around the Mai prefecture," Ochako answered as they continued to walk. Many other examinees watched them, giving them a wide berth as they had seen how Izuku had destroyed the zero-pointer. Some said it was a dumb move and he wasted time to get more points, while others were amazed by Izuku's quirk and how he handled the zero-pointer seemingly so easily. "That's a good day for a train ride away. You must have ridden through the night to get to UA on time," Izuku asked as the entrance gate came into view. "Actually, I'm staying at an apartment complex that an old friend of my parents owns. For now, he's letting me use a vacant room. If I get into UA, then we'll have to work out a longer deal." Ochako said that was only partly true, as it wasn't a question of whether she was going to get into UA. Even if she didn't, she had friends in the background who could pull some strings to get her in. "What apartment complex?" Izuku asked. 50-minute bus right north of UA. Sunrise Apartment, near Takoba Beach, Ochako said as they passed the entrance gate. Benches with refreshments had been set up. Izuku helped Ochako over to it and together they sat down. "Oh, Kaken and I live over there. If you want, so you don't have to deal with the bus fare, I can drive you home," Izuku said, as he looked through the different coolers and chose a sports drink. Ochako's face immediately got a little red and she had to turn from Izuku to hide her face. Once she calmed down a bit, she said, "That sounds like a kind gesture, but I don't think I like how you drive. Again, sorry about that. Promise that not I typically drive. Guess I was just working myself up for the exam," Izuku said, as he opened his energy drink and downed most of it. "Please let me do this, then I won't bring it back up again." Ochako looked away from Izuku, a million thoughts running through her head. The main prominent one is that this could work for being able to get close to him. Ochako looked at Izuku and took everything in. His destroyed jacket and t-shirt showed off his toned right arm, his chiseled chin that he held up with confidence, his dark purple eyes that bore into her soul. Yet he spoke softly and comfortably. Ochako sighed as he dropped her head into her hands, forgetting her mission. "I can't believe I'm going to say this, but yes, I will let you drive me home." "Thank you. Now drink and eat a sandwich. It will help with exhaustion," Izuku said, sliding a sports drink and sandwich over to Ochako. Ochako accepted them and slowly ate them. As she did, she could feel her body's energy refill and she felt like she could keep her eyes open. The two of them sat at the table for a few minutes to recover, eating the food that had been provided. Once they had enough energy, they caught a bus back to the main campus where Izuku led Ochako over to his motorcycle, where Bakugo was waiting for them. He was leaning against his bike and as soon as he saw Izuku he asked, "What's you count?" "Don't know, lost count. Got the zero-pointer though, what about you?" Izuku said, grabbing his helmet from the handle. He undid the buckle, then tightened the straps a bit. He didn't have an extra helmet so he planned on letting Ochako use his. "Pa, you wasted your time on that big thing. My count is 115. Bakugo said, then noticed Ochako. "What's with pink cheeks?" Ochako became flustered at the nickname but didn't move as Izuku handed her his helmet. "Met her during the exam. She's staying in town for the time being and I offered to give her a ride home. You know that apartment complex that's only a few minutes away from the beach? She's staying there for now." Bakugo looked Ochako over then said, "Wait, isn't this the extra you almost ran over before the exam?" Izuku sighed as he slipped on his bike and said, "Yes, but I promise I won't bring it back up again. And that offering is now including you, so she doesn't have to hear and neither do I." Bakugo scoffed as he got his bike and turned it over. Once the engine kicked in, he slipped his helmet on and said, "Just don't get into any fucking funny business." Bakugo backed his bike out and then tore out of the parking lot. Izuku sighed as he watched Bakugo drive away. Bakugo said what he said, but he knew Izuku was the last person to do anything like that. If he did, there would be a list of people that would kill him. And depending on their moods, Inko and Mero switched between first and second. "So that's Bakugo," Ochako said as he was more than she was expecting. After she slipped Izuku's helmet on, he helped her onto the bike. Izuku kept the bike perfectly balanced as Ochako slid on. He instructed Ochako how to hold on around his waist. then said, "Yep, now hold on." He then turned his motorcycle on and shifted into reverse. Once he was clear, he shifted the bike into first gear and pulled out of the parking lot, keeping the bike 5 kilometers below the speed limit. Izuku worked to make sure Ochako felt safe on the back. As they drove, Ochako gave out directions to the apartment complex she was staying in. Within 20 minutes, Izuku pulled into the parking lot and over to a vacant parking spot. He stopped his motorcycle and put his legs down. He then looked over at the apartments. They all looked like standard apartments, the kind he and his mother lived in before Mero helped them move into their current house. "This is where you live?" Izuku asked, looking over his shoulder at Ochako. Ochako slid the helmet off and said, "Yeah, though my parents are still in my, so I'm on my own." Izuku looked over the apartments again, realizing they were modest apartments, a lot better than Inko and he lived in before Project Velocity. He looked back at Ochako and then said, "Oh, you're living on your own then?" Izuku paused for a moment, then added, "You're free to say no, but after today aren't you going to be a little too tired to cook for yourself?" "Not really. My family has always been tight with money, so I typically only have some ramen and some kind of side for dinner. Those aren't hard to make, so I should be good by myself," Ochako said as she slipped off the back of the bike. Then to layer it on, she added, "I'm not that tired." "Really? What your family's business?" Izuku said, as he accepted his helmet back. Though he didn't slip on, he just held in his lap. "Construction. But lately we haven't been able to get big projects," Ochako said, looking at Izuku. She tried not to, as it distracted her, but she couldn't help but stare into his eyes. She could feel herself starting to get lost in the purple of his eyes. "Oh, it's just after a day like this, don't you think you deserve a big meal? You did burn a lot of calories during the exam and you're going to feel exhausted after Recovery Girl used her quirk. Ramen and some fruit aren't going to fill you up. You're tight on money, so how would you like to have dinner with my mother and her sister?" Izuku said as he looked Ochako back in her brown eyes. He was trying to not check her out, as Izuku had noticed she had a well-esteemed body, but now he was starting to get lost in Ochako's eyes. "Midoriya, are you asking me out for dinner?" Ochako asked. Izuku froze and went red. After a moment he was able to stutter, No, nothing like that. It's just you worked hard today and you deserve to be able to enjoy yourself. If you like, I'm sure my mother won't mean making extra dinner for you. I mean, she's probably going to be making extra anyways. And she always enjoys having company around the house." Ochako thought about it for a second. She was hot and sweaty. She didn't smell good, but she was hungry and she was not one to turn down free food, especially home-cooked meals. She looked at her apartment, then back at Izuku. "Give me 10 minutes and I'll be ready to go." Izuku smiled as turned off his bike and slipped his helmet onto the left handle. "I'll be waiting." With that out of the way, Ochako turned and quickly ran to her apartment. In a fluid motion, Ochako pulled out her keys, unlocked the door and slipped into. Ochako closed the door and had to lean against it as she worked to catch her breath. It could be that easy to get close to Izuku, to become his friend. He was supposed to be skeptical, ruthless, and a sin of pride. At least that was what the file described him as. A file she had memorized and knew by heart. Yet as Ochako fell to the ground, she thought about how Izuku had been acting. He was kind and looking for forgiveness for something that was half Ochako's fault. Ochako began hitting the back of her head against the day, as she realized that today had gone as planned at all. Well, at least not the Madam President of the Hero Public Safety Commission had planned. Ochako wasn't even supposed to fully meet Izuku until the 0-pointer. She was supposed to stay in his eye line, allowing him to memorize her looks so that when the time came, she could pretend to be in trouble and allow him to rescue her. That had been the plan, to pretend to be a damsel in distress and give Izuku something to feel good about, which didn't go as planned as she was exactly in trouble with the 0-pointers. Yet that hadn't been when the problem started. Why didn't Ochako look both ways before crossing the street? After that small interaction, she tried to salvage the plan by standing away from Izuku, but then he just had to make the first move and approach her. And if nothing else but to apologize and give her some advice. Then during the exam, they crossed paths and Izuku had gone even so far to help her and another person in the exam. His reasoning, he was bored and she looked like could use the help. In the moment, Ochako was offended by the mere thought. But about cooling off, she realized it could help in her mission. Yet was Ochako getting in too deep, too quickly? Would Izuku eventually think her willingness to go along with him was suspicious? Ochako had to make a call. Ochako pulled out her phone and dialed a number. There was a bit of static in a pattern before the line connected and Ochako then turned the phone to speaker. "Status," a robotic voice said. The day did not go as planned. Contact with the target was made earlier than expected. Further contact was also made on the target's behalf, Ochako said as she dropped her phone to the ground. She dropped her head into her hands in distress. She had been given this mission because she had been trusted to fulfill it. Yet had she failed before she had a chance to see it through? Does the target suspect anything? The voice asked. Ochako paused. If Izuku did, he would be inviting her to dinner. Ochako blushed a bit at that thought. No, he believes that event of days happened by circumstance. So much that he's invited me to have dinner with his mother and sister, Ochako said as she brushed a few hair strands away from her eyes. Repeat that again, Iravati. The target invited you to have dinner with his mother, the voice asked, and his sister, Ochako said, not missing the fact her handler had excluded that. His file states he's an only child, Ochako's handler asked. Ochako pulled up Izuku's file and within relationships, under the family was Inko Midoriya, mother, and Hisashi Midoriya, father. There was no mention of a younger sister. Then your file must be wrong. I heard him say younger sister. Ochako then realized something. He only mentioned her once, then he would only refer to his mother or just say my family. I'm calling because intact contact went further than expected, and I have a way to get closer. Do I take it? Ochako asked as she picked up her phone and began walking towards the bathroom. Yes, the timetable is moving faster than expected, but it has been done by the target's choices. You must follow his pacing and use every opportunity he presents. Remember, get close and stay ready. If Izuku Tsutsumani makes a room, he must not ready for you to stop him. Ochako's handler said. Okay, then I've got to get ready for a date, Ochako said as she ended the call and put her phone on the bathroom counter. Turning on the shower, Ochako didn't wait for the water to warm up. She stripped her clothes off and hopped in. As the water washed over her body, she pushed her stress into it and let it get washed down the drain. She then set about washing all the sweat off her body. Slowly the water warmed up, filling Ochako's body with energy as it did so. Once Ochako was clean, she turned off the water and hopped out and wrapped a towel around herself. After picking up her dirty clothes, Ochako carried them to the room where she tossed them into the corner. She then walked over to her dresser and pulled out a pair of panties and a bra. After slipping on those, Ochako searched for a pair of jeans that had the least amount of holes she needed to give the impression she was serious about this. Once her legs were through the jeans, Ochako opened the drawer right above her jeans and pulled out a light pink t-shirt. After working her arms through, Ochako slipped her head through the top and then pulled the shirt down the rest of the way. She quickly grabbed a pair of socks and then ran back to the bathroom, where she pulled out a bottle of mouthwash from under the counter. After 2 quick spit takes, Ochako slid the container back under the sink. As she headed back into the kitchen, Ochako worked the socks over her feet. Once she reached the front door, she slipped back into her shoes. She quickly grabbed her keys and wallet from the counter and then walked over to the door. As she grabbed the handle, she froze for a bit. She had been learning about her target for the past year, training to be his equal, in case what Madam President predicted came true. Yet not it suddenly felt real. Ochako had met Izuku. She had seen him in action, but his files did not do his skills justice. Moreover, she was learning what kind of person he was. Then Ochako went back to his dark purple eyes. She had started to get lost in them and now she was getting lost just thinking about them. Ochako felt her cheek warm up and her heart started to race. Was this a mistake? No, she had trained for this. Ochako could hold herself back, keeping herself from getting lost in the mission. Taking a deep breath, Ochako calmed herself. She could do this. Ochako put on a smile as she opened the door and walked back to Izuku. She found him lying on his bike looking up at the blue sky. As she walked up, he sat up and smiled at her. I called my mother and she's good with you coming over. I didn't think I've ever heard her so excited before. Wonderful, Ochako said as Izuku held out his helmet for her to take again. Ochako smiled as she slipped the helmet back and got back onto the bike. As Ochako slid her arms around Izuku's waist, he turned the key and his motorcycle came back to life. He kicked it into reverse and pulled out the parking spot. After shifting into first gear, Izuku directed his bike out onto the main road. Once they got to the main road, it was a short 4-minute drive to Izuku's home. Once there, Izuku opened the garage with his remote and slowly rolled his bike into its bay. Izuku then turned off the engine and dropped the kickstand. He helped Ochako get off. Then she slipped the helmet off and handed it to Izuku. Izuku smiled as he slipped off his bike and rested his helmet on the seat. Izuku led Ochako through the garage and into the living room. He was tackled by a blur of white hair and felt a horn press into his chest. Though Izuku didn't show it, as he was used to being exhausted after intense training, he was still quite tired. And as he wasn't expecting to be tackled, Eri managed to knock him back onto his butt. Izuku hit the ground and felt Eri's horn poke a little more into his chest. But still, he just laughed as he returned the hug. I guess you missed me. I saw Kaken arrive home, but when you didn't come home I began to worry, Eri said, keeping a death grip on Izuku's arm with some worry in her voice. Izuku smiled as he brushed Eri's hair out of her face, then wrapped her up in his right arm. Izuku rotated to his side and stood up, bringing Eri along with him. Sorry, but I had to help a friend out, Izuku said, then turned so Eri could see Ochako. Ochako gave a small smile and waved, but Eri just curled up on herself. Sorry, she's shy to new people. Ochako nodded. She might be here to have dinner, but her true purpose was to learn more about her target, which began with learning about his family. Eri noticed the scar on Izuku's arm and said in a timid voice, "We match, did the man get to you too?" Izuku looked at the scar on his arm and said, "No, the man didn't get to me. You remember, you don't have to worry about him anymore. He's not going to hurt you anymore." "Okay," Eri said as Izuku lowered her to the ground, though she had kept her hands in his. Ochako smiled at the sight while putting it in the back of her mind to think about later, Izuku being a protective older brother. Yet who was this man Eri brought up? "Where's Mom?" Izuku asked, and Eri pointed to the kitchen. "Can you go get her for me?" Eri nodded and took off towards the kitchen. Once she was done, Izuku turned and looked at Ochako. Who was she referring to? "Hopefully not your dad," Ochako said. There was little in the file about Hisashi, as he wasn't much in the picture, living in America. Yet Izuku seemed like a good person, but if his adopted father was abusive or any kind of the sort, then maybe he had an underlying mental disability. Izuku shook his head and said, "No, nothing like it. My father is in America right now. Eri isn't my younger sister either." Izuku thought about the conversation he had with Inko and Mero about how to explain Eri's past. Izuku looked at Ochako and decided she should know the truth, as they might become classmates and she would be around Eri a lot. She was being held by an old Yakuza family that was using her blood to create a new drug to destroy Quirk. Ochako took in a sharp breath and held a hand over her mouth. She looked over Izuku's face, begging God that she would find signs that Izuku was lying. Kept he wasn't, and that made it even worse. "Fortunately, I was able to rescue her and the Yakuza were all in prison. That was 3 months ago, and she's only recently opened up to other people, like my mom. That's why she was shy when she first saw you," Izuku said. Ochako's eyes went wide. First, from all that Izuku had just told her, and second, the fact he had just dumped everything on her. Third was the fact that his file stated Izuku had been training since he was 6, but still she was surprised he was good enough to go against a Yakuza family and rescue a kid of them. Ochako debated if it came down to it. Was she truly Izuku's equal, as she didn't think she had that kind of skill? Moreover, how did Madam President not hear about this or know about Eri? 3 months ago, the Shai Hasekai was raided at the beginning of the year. Was that the Yakuza family holding her? Sir Nidai's agency claimed to be the head of the raid, along with the assistance of Fatcom, Lockrock, and Rukyu. When the press asked about how Sir Nidai was about to order a raid, he said he received an anonymous tip from an underground network, a tip that held enough to warrant a warrant. "And the man?" Ochako asked after she composed herself, allowing the back of her mind to work to decipher all the information Izuku had just given her. Was Izuku the one who had given the tip and done so anonymously to keep himself and Eri out of the media spotlight? Yakuza's leader, a man by the name of Kai Chisaki, was using his quirk violently to rebuild Eri's body after draining her of most of her blood. That's where all her scars are from. So when she saw my scar, she thought Chisaki had found me. He's been in prison for 2 months now, but she still worries about being found, Izuku said as he led Ochako to the kitchen. Oh, that was all Ochako could say. She couldn't imagine the life Eri had to live. Getting rescued by Izuku was most likely the first good thing to happen to her. Now it was time to learn more about her target. Do you know what her quirk is? No. All we know is that it was used by the Shai Hasekai to create their new drugs. I guessed it is linked to the horn on her hairline, but it seems she doesn't know what or how to use her quirk. My mom and I are just waiting for it to reveal itself, as blood work hasn't come back with any results, Izuku said. Ochako gave a small nod at that information as they walked into the kitchen. Inko was standing at the stove working on preparing dinner, while Eri was sitting at the table working on her letters. Inko heard their footsteps and turned around. She smiled at the two and said, "You must be Uraraka. My son informed me that you would be coming over." Ochako smiled back and said, "Your son helped me a lot in the entrance exam. If not for him, I might not have passed." Izuku rubbed the back of his head and said, "I just told you where the robots were. You still had to do the legwork." Inko chuckled, causing both Izuku and Ochako to look at her with confused faces. "Oh, don't mind me," Inko said. She worked hard to hold her laughter back. Izuku had innocently brought a cute girl home and just admitted he thought she was strong. "I'll just be here working on dinner. You two enjoy yourselves." Izuku and Ochako walked over to the table, where Eri greeted Izuku again. Izuku helped Eri a bit with her homework, then looked at Ochako. "Do you want to play a game or something? Dinner won't be ready for another hour." "Sure," Ochako said. Izuku hadn't planned anything besides dinner, so he was making things up as he went, which almost made her laugh, as this would be a funny first date. Ochako immediately stopped laughing at that thought, hoping Izuku didn't notice. Izuku nodded and led Ochako upstairs, to a side closet that held mostly extra blankets while 2 shelves housed board games. Ochako looked over the closet, scanning the games, then picked out 2 board games. As Izuku pulled them out, she asked, "I saw you had a PlayStation downstairs. I thought boys were all into video games." "Yeah, but I haven't played much since Eri arrived. My games are a little mature and my mom and I decided it was best not to let her see them." I have a few kid-friendly ones, but even then I've been busy preparing for the entrance exam," Izuku said as he held the board games in his arms. As they passed Izuku's room, he quickly stepped inside and returned a few seconds later with 5 small silver containers. Ochako looked at the containers as they walked down the stairs and as they walked back into the kitchen. Despite already knowing what they were, she asked, "What's in the containers? Remember how I mentioned dyeing my hair affects what type of bullet is formed?" Izuku asked as he knew he brought it up, but it had been bereft and both were more focused on the zero-pointer. "Somewhat," Ochako said, as Izuku put the board games on the table and then slid the container onto the table. Yuri looked at the container with focus. Something she had come to like doing was dyeing her hair with Izuku. As the hair dye wasn't meant to last long, just long enough for Izuku to create bullets, Yuri could dye her hair any color she wanted while not worrying about it being permanent. Moreover, the dyes easily came out with a quick rinse. "Well, if I dye a strand of my hair before weaving it into a bullet, then said bullet can have special properties," Izuku said as he opened the top off of the container with blue hair dye. He tipped his left fingers in and then pulled them out. Izuku made a show of dyeing a few strands of hair and then weaving them into a bullet. Once the bullet solidified, he put it on the table to show to Ochako. Blue is trank, red is incendiary, orange is flashbangs, yellow is for explosive rounds, and green allows the bullet to ricochet, Izuku said as he weaved a few more blue bullets. "What about other colors, like purple, white, and black?" Ochako asked. She grabbed one of the bullets. Though it was about the size of a rifle bullet, it was light. Since it was just dyed, she was expecting it to be wet, but it was dry to the touch. "Purple doesn't do anything as purple is the main color already. White is a smoke grenade and black is. I can't remember what black does. I don't do white because I have these dyes specially made as they quickly dry and come out of leftover hair with a shower or two. White is difficult to make and I prefer flashbangs anyway," Izuku said, then felt Uri poke his arm. Izuku already knew what she wanted to do, though she didn't smile while doing it. It was clear she enjoyed dyeing Izuku's hair. So he pushed the yellow container over to her and leaned his hair over the back of the chairs. Yuri's eyes became focused as she opened the container and tipped her fingers in. She then stood up on her chair and began to weave Izuku's hair. Ochako smiled at this and asked, "Mind if I join?" She was an only child, so she never had a younger sister to do her hair with. "Sure, just don't braid my hair. It messes with weaving the bullets," Izuku said as he pushed the blue container to Ochako. Ochako smiled as she tipped her finger into the hair dye and then, following Yuri's example, began weaving Izuku's hair. What she was not expecting was how soft and gentle Izuku's hair was. It felt like she was weaving white fluffy clouds around with her fingers, the perfect material to fill a fluffy pillow with. Suddenly Izuku said, surprised, "Yuri loves playing with my hair because of how soft it is. She even fallen asleep using my hair as a pillow. Is that why it's so long?" Ochako asked, as the hair in her fingers became stiff and formed into a bullet. She had first noticed how long Izuku's hair was when they began talking before the exam. "Partly, you see, my hair grows fast because of my quirk and I got tired of having to get a haircut every 3 weeks, Izuku said, as a small smile appeared on his face and he closed his eyes. As Yuri and Ochako worked his hair, it felt like his head was getting a massage. He let out a small sigh as the two continued to weave his hair. As the number of yellow and blue bullets began to increase, Izuku had Yuri and Ochako switch to red and orange. As they did this, Izuku transformed his right arm and began to slide the bullet into his rifle. Ochako tried not to show too much interest in the weapon. They never got to the games as the girls seemed to really enjoy playing with Izuku's hair and did so until an hour later and called for dinner. Izuku quickly slid the last few bullets in, then transformed his arm back. He carried the games and dye containers to a side counter, while Ochako helped Inko set the table. Once all the plates, glasses, and utensils were set, everyone gathered around the table. Once thanks were given, each went about eating. Only mild conversations were held throughout dinner, with Inko asking to hear about how the exam went. Izuku opted not to inform his mother how he chose to quickly descend a building. Once dinner was finished, the group finally got to the board games, and Ochako proved how much she dominated at board games. The night ended as Yuri began to become sleepy, and Inko took her upstairs to get ready for bed. While this went on, Izuku grabbed his key and wallet and drove Ochako back home. They rode in silence to Ochako's apartment building. Once in the parking lot, Ochako looked at Izuku, her mind still fighting between what she had seen tonight and the files she had read about. He said, "Were the files wrong, or was it just an act Izuku had put on for her? And if he was, why would he? Was it because he liked her?" Ochako was glad she still had the helmet on and Izuku couldn't see her face. "It's sweet what you and your mom are doing for her." She paused for a second, then added, "I guess I still don't fully understand how you rescued her." Izuku smiled, then said, "You might have noticed I have a little more experience than the other examinees." It was a proud statement, but his voice was more neutral. "I noticed. You were able to lead Shinsu and me around while making sure you didn't fall behind in points," Ochako said as she slipped off the helmet and the bike. And you remember my mom's old friends that got Bakugo and I bike early? Izuku asked and Ochako nodded. Well, those old friends are in charge of a program that helps young kids with powerful or hard-to-control quirks learn how to control their powers. My family has some dark past that I don't fully understand, but my mom wanted to make sure that I was able to protect myself from a young age. Izuku then went on to explain how Project Velocity trained himself and Bakugo to use their quirks to become heroes. He talked about the different training he went through and how it led to him being the only one skilled enough to take on the mission that led him to rescue her. How he brought her to the hospital and how he and Inko are helping her recover from the abuse she suffered at the hands of Kai Chisaki. Ochako was frozen as Izuku explained Project Velocity, though he never outright said the name. Most of what Izuku said, Ochako knew from her files, yet there were some of the finer details that were new to her. It was nothing like her training, it was more harsh and gruesome training. She hasn't been able to smile, but we're hoping one day her light will come back to her, that she'll be able to enjoy her life without worrying about her past. Izuku then ended his recap. Ochako thought back to when she and Eri died. Izuku Hari. Eri seemed calm but wasn't really smiling. She was doing something she seemed to enjoy, but still couldn't smile. Well, it's sweet what you're doing, and I would love to become one of Eri's friends, and I'm only a small drive away if she wants me over again, Ochako said, then pulled out her phone. Call me if she does. Izuku smiled as he pulled out his phone and they pressed the back of their phones together. Their contact information was shared immediately. Ochako began to walk away but stopped when Izuku said, Eri really enjoyed your company. She might not show it, but she opened up to you extremely fast. The only other person she opened to that quickly was me. Eri took a bit of time to be comfortable around my mother and she's still scared by Kaken. Ochako looked at Izuku and he had a small comforting smile on his face. Well, I'm happy to come over whenever Eri wants me to. Izuku laughed and said, don't be surprised if she asks for you in the coming days. Izuku winked then slipped on his helmet. He revved his engine and then tore out of the parking lot. Ochako smiled as she watched Izuku drive away, watching until his tail lights disappeared. She stood there for a few minutes, then headed into her apartment. Since moving in, she had been having trouble falling asleep in her bed. Living by herself seemed to make every noise that much louder. But that night, she was asleep the second her head hit the pillow and she fell into a calm dream. The next 2 weeks were extremely stressful for Izuku. He knew he had passed the written exam. He and Bakugo had often stayed up late into the night study. He had racked up a lot of points in the practical exam. But maybe UA didn't like that he chose to help other students. What if they saw it as cheating and in the end didn't allow Izuku to enroll? And by extension Ochako and Shinsu. Izuku tried to distract himself with schoolwork, but he went through so quickly that it wasn't much of a distraction. He and Bakugo continued to train in their backyards, but Izuku could tell that Bakugo was starting to stress too. He played games with Inko and Eri, but his mind wasn't fully on the games. He even went so far as to stay up late and play his PlayStation to try and get his mind off of it. Yet that only worked for so long. As the 2 weeks began to come to a close, Izuku was checking the mail every day when he got home from school. But eventually, the mark of the 2 weeks came and went and Izuku didn't have a letter. He tried not to act depressed in front of Eri, but he could only do so much. It wasn't until Saturday, 3 days after the letter was supposed to arrive, that Inko came crashing into the living room. She held up a white envelope as she ran towards her son. Tripping before she made it, she threw the envelope in his lap. Izuku picked up the envelope and turned it over, revealing the UA wax seal. It took a few moments for the seal to register in Izuku's mind, but once it did, he quickly stood up, knocking the board games he and Eri were playing from the coffee table. Eri looked at the discarded game for a second, then focused on Izuku as he worked to open the letter. He tore the side of the envelope off and pulled out a letter. As he pulled out the letter, a silver disc fell out and landed on the table. The disc beeped a few times, then a hologram appeared in the air. Izuku noticed who was standing before him and yelled, All Might. This was a letter from UA. Why was the symbol of peace in it? Wait, did that mean All Might has taken a position as a teacher? At the sudden appearance of the hero and Izuku yelling, Eri scrambled under the table. Izuku's protective instincts kicked in, so he paused the message and dropped down to the floor. He looked under the coffee table and saw tears forming around Eri's eyes. Izuku bit his tongue for a second, then said, I'm sorry, Eri. I didn't mean to yell. I promise that it won't happen again. He slid a hand under the table and Eri slowly reached out and grabbed it. Izuku slowly pulled Eri out from the table and wrapped her in a hug as he sat down on the table. He pointed to the hologram and asked, Do you know who that is? Eri looked at the hologram and softly said, All Might. She had seen Izuku's highly decorative room many times before she had been moved to her own separate room when she got comfortable sleeping by herself. Izuku nodded and said, He's your brother's favorite hero. So I'm sorry if I yelled and scared you. Eri nodded. Izuku always got super excited when All Might was involved anywhere. She pointed to the hologram and said, Does this mean you got in? Izuku smiled at Eri as Inko got off the floor and sat down next to her son. Izuku reached forward and played the message. "Hello there, young Midoriya," All Might yelled, causing Eri to hide her face in Izuku's chest. Izuku sighed as he paused the video and worked Eri out of his chest. Once Eri was calm, Izuku resumed the video. "It is I, All Might, and I am here not only to announce your results for the exam but to announce that I have taken a position as a teacher at UA. I will be over the first years." Inko chuckled as Izuku's jaw dropped and hit the floor. Izuku couldn't believe it. All Might was becoming a teacher at UA. He was going to be a teacher for the first years. Izuku was already making plans to get the #1 hero to sign some of his stuff. Eri waved a hand in front of Izuku's unblinking eyes and said, "Izuku is broken. Yes, you heard me correctly. I am the newest member of UA's faculty. I'm looking forward to meeting you in class," All Might said. Izuku had to use every ounce of willpower not to pass out from shock. More will be explained in your secondary letter. But now, for your test score. You scored a perfect 100 over 100 on the written portion, a feat only a few have achieved. And as for the practical exam, you better sit down for this. Not only did you receive the top score of 130 villain points, but you also received additional 60 points of rescue points, as you rescued one Hitoshi Shinsu over some 1-pointers. Izuku cocked his head at this. He had only destroyed one 1-pointer and one Ochako Uraraka from the 0-point Roba. That gives you a total of 190 points, the third highest in UA's history. However, there is one last action of yours to consider. Through your guidance and leadership, young Uraraka and Shinsu were able to increase their score as well. So for these actions, UA has given you an additional 30 points, giving you a total of 220 points in the practical exam, the second highest score in point. As All Might spoke, his and Endeavor's scores from their entrance exam appeared on screen. Izuku saw that he had scored 2 more points than Endeavor, the #2 hero in Japan. Izuku had to slap himself hard to stay conscious. He couldn't believe it. Not only had he gotten the top score of the year, but he had gotten the second highest overall score. "Welcome to your hero academia," All Might said, and then the hologram disappeared. Izuku could only stare blankly at the wall behind the hologram, his mind going crazy from the information he just learned. It wasn't until a banging came from the door that Izuku took a breath. "Boy, you damn nerd. How you did get shoulda F 432 king high score," Bakugo yelled. Inko quickly covered Eri's ears, but she asked, "Is he saying funny words?" Izuku could see the murder in his mother's eyes. To save his friend from that disaster, he quickly walked over to the door and opened it. He had to step back from Bakugo's fist coming down to knock again. "Hey Kaken, so you got in too?" Izuku asked, but already knew the answer. He knew Bakugo would want to brag about it. "Of course I got in. They would have been stupid not to let me in. Now tell me how you foo." Bakugo paused and saw the murder in Aunt Inko's eyes. He saw that she was covering Eri's ears. "How did you get 220 points? That has to be a record." "Technically it is. I beat Endeavor's score by 2 points," Izuku said, causing Bakugo to start growling and setting off explosions in his hands. "All right, my villain score was only 130. I got the additional points through rescues and leadership qualities." "Rescues, leadership qualities," Bakugo growled, forcing Izuku to explain how he rescued Ochako from the 0-pointer and how he helped her and Shinsu get some extra points. As Izuku talked, Bakugo's growl got louder and louder until he held up a hand and unleashed an explosion right in Izuku's face. Inko yelled at Bakugo, but Izuku simply held up a hand and waved the smoke from his head. His face was mostly unharmed, but his hair was covered in black smoke. "You know how long that takes to clean out, but I deserved that. Are you calm now? Satisfied for now?" Bakugo said, shoving his hands in his pockets. Next time they spared, Bakugo was going to make sure Izuku ate dirt. "Anything else you would like to say?" Izuku asked. "Where's Pink Cheeks? She beat my score too with those rescue points," Bakugo said. "At her apartment. You can talk to her at school," Izuku said. Bakugo growled, then walked away. Izuku smiled as he closed the door and turned back to Inko and Eri. Inko was still covering Eri's ears. "You can let her go." Inko released Eri and she quickly ran over and hugged Izuku, though it didn't seem out of fear. "Good job, Izuku." Izuku smiled as Eri looked at him in his eyes. He could see some light returning to her eye. Inko walked over and handed Izuku the letter he had pulled out. "You better make sure you got everything ready." Izuku nodded and read the letter. The first thing he read was that he would be a part of Class 1 of UA's Hero course. As soon as he read that, Izuku finally passed out.